like to convene the Single Family Design Board meeting for June 20th, 2023. We will start with a roll call, please.
All right. Chair Kalas,
Here.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Here.
Board Member Garfeiti,
Here.
Board Member Lewis,
Here.
Board Member Sherry.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item up is general business. We will allow an opportunity for anybody from the public who would like to make comment on anything that is within the purview of this board, but that is not calendared for today's agenda, to take 2 minutes and address our board at the podium if they would care to do so. So I'll turn it over to staff to open up that opportunity at this time.
Thank you, Chair Kalas. I'll go ahead and start with in-person public comment. At this time, I do have one request to speak, so I'll start with Sharon Fritz. If you could make your way up to the podium, you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon. This is a request to have a project located at 1830 Overlook Lane reviewed at the consent, which was reviewed at the consent hearing on June 12th as item B. And I would like to have it reviewed by the full Single Family Design Board for reconsideration for re-roofing of the project home with Brava lightweight synthetic Spanish tile and replacing the existing red composition shingle roofing that exists now. The proposed Brava Spanish tile is a lightweight tile, and it would not require a full re-roofing system structural upgrade. The building would need that in order to achieve a Spanish colonial style that was recommended by the board at our consent hearing. The style that we want to install is a lightweight tile, and we would like to have this Spanish tile that really is what's desired by the homeowner be considered by the board so that they can install this tile without having to completely redo the structure of the home. That would require about $80,000 to $100,000 or more in structural upgrades. The nearby homes also have Spanish tile, along with a variety of other types of roofing material, and it would not be out of place to have this product on the home. We believe the addition of this material to be an improvement in the general neighborhood due to the appearance of the Spanish tile as compared to the composition shingles, as evidenced by the attached photos that were in the submittal. Brava Spanish tile is 285 pounds per square. The traditional clay or concrete Spanish tile would be anywhere from 600 to 1,200 pounds per square. The existing home structure would require upgrades, as I said, in the cost of approximately $100,000.
Okay, thank you very much. Your time is up.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask staff for direction on this item because this is specifically related to an item that was agendized and seen previously on the board as opposed to a general public comment.
So to Chair Kalas, we are going to be providing staff comments when when the minutes for consent come up. So we'll explain, but I'd say if there's any, I would finish public comment and we'll get to the comments. What staff have comments for that particular consent item and how it should be processed or considerations for you.
Thank you. Okay, is there anybody else? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else in the public that would care to speak to an item that is not on the agenda today?
Okay.
No. Is there anybody online?
If you wish to speak on Zoom, you can go ahead and raise your hand at this time, and I'll call on you. And seeing no hands raised on Zoom, we also did not receive any general written correspondence, so I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Kalas.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to approval of the minutes. We'll start with the minutes from June 5th. That was a full board hearing, I believe. Does anybody have any comments for staff or any corrections on the draft meeting minutes for June 5th? Okay. Well, I would like to make a motion for approval of these meeting minutes then from June 5th, 2023. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
If we could have a roll call, please.
All right, Chair Kalas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Graffitti,
Yes.
Board Member Lewis,
Abstain.
Board Member Sherry.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. So we will move on to the next set of meeting minutes. Those are from June 12th. This was, I was in attendance for this meeting. This is 1830 Overlook Lane. This is the item that the public commenter was speaking on. If staff would like to provide us with their comments at this time.
Yes. Hello, I'm Sebastian, city staff. And so for this process is that if you take a look at the minutes language, you'll see that the motion is project design approval and final approval denied. Based on the board cannot support the project because of criteria A of the neighborhood preservation ordinance findings. And the second portion of the motion gave options for the applicant to return with, different approvable, essentially materials that would be suitable for the home. And currently is because this project was denied at that consent hearing is that the applicant had to attend this hearing to request a referral to the full board, asking that because the motion didn't say return back to conforming review or return to full board, that's why they had to make their public comment here today. So for next steps for this project is essentially whether or not, depending on whether you guys want to grant that referral or not, it would be reflected in the minutes here. So it could be continued on to a full board if the board feels that the referral is justified, and whether or not the findings made at consent were agreeable to the rest of the board or not. If they are not agreeable, and you guys would essentially verify the minutes as is with what it states there. I do want to give background that the applicant is interested in appealing this further after this hearing based on the decision here today. So if you want to.
So I'd like to.
If I can ask or add one thing. So what happens every time we bring minutes here, you ratify them at the full board. So the consent meeting, there was an action taken, but the action in terms of the SFDB's action as the full board will happen today. And so this particular applicant has requested consideration for the full board to continue it. Or if you agree with the decision maker, you could just ratify the minutes and that solidifies what was discussed at the consent hearing. So we just wanted to clarify that because we need to clarify that for the applicant in order to let them understand what their due process is. So,
Okay, thank you. So I would like to make one comment that's not specifically related to the comments made, but rather the motion that was made. When I walked away from that meeting, because I was the one that was overseeing consent that day, I realized it would have been more appropriate to continue the item back to consent calendar with the direction that had been given. I would be amenable to revising the motion in that regard. However, if the board feels that they would like to see this at full board, clearly I'm amenable to that too. So I just wanted to provide that background. It would have made more sense for that motion to have been a continuance back to consent rather than a strict denial. And I apologize for that error.
and Chair Kloss, I wouldn't call that an error, honestly, in terms of
It's
making a
okay.
decision,
I
I
can own
think.
it.
Well, I think part of it is, well, one other consideration we have to make is that depending on this particular project has been deemed complete, and what that means is there's a permit streamline, so we need to have a decision. So in some ways, within a certain timeline, we need to have a decision made. So again, I wouldn't, we just need to kind of understand from the applicant's perspective of like, again, what And I'm not sure what they're willing to do, but this is the conversation before you. If you have any other questions, we are happy to answer.
Okay, I'm going to stay out of deliberations because I was the deciding party. I'll leave that up to the board. If the board has questions about the motion that was made, or the language in the motion, or the rationale behind it, I'm happy to provide that to the other members of the board.
A question I would have is, given the Permit Streamlining Act, how many days into this since it's been deemed complete? Do we have an idea?
We can figure that out. I mean, there's still time on it. I'm
Okay.
not in.
Cool.
So does anybody have any thoughts as to whether this
So I
rises
guess-
to the threshold of being seen by full board, or
Yeah,
Just
you can
looking for
either-
input
again,
from the board.
Just clarifying, you can either ratify the minutes as it's written here, and that it was denied, and for the following reasons, or if you choose as a board and to see this continued, or to bring it to the full board as a matter of the full board, you have that option as well. Or you could amend it and just return it back to consent. I don't know if that meets the intention of what the applicant is interested in. So I don't necessarily want to add process if they're not interested in another material. That's my only other comment on that.
Okay, thank you. Leaning over into your microphone.
Yeah, I agree that a denial is probably not in the best interest of the applicant. So I would agree that the motion would be changed to a continuance of some sort. My question is whether I would be open to it coming to the full board, because I don't think the applicant has any interest in the two-piece mission clay tile. So I guess the question in front of us is whether or not there's support for anything other than a two-piece mission clay tile. And I, for one, am interested in learning about a new product that might look different than previous S tiles that we've seen in the past. Certainly I'm open to an applicant wanting to save $100,000 or $150,000 and tearing their whole house down just so they can have mission tile. So I would be open to looking at that, provided that the minutes reflect that the applicant should return with either examples of how this product has been used in true application, not just a piece of tile, and because that, for me, would weigh heavily on my decision.
I agree.
I'm just wondering why it needs to come back to full board, I guess, for the multiple opinions. And I'm questioning, so the 24 squares, is that the whole entire roof you're replacing?
So if
Yeah.
I may, and it's really, I don't necessarily want to open up the project. It's really kind of a procedural question of, do you want to continue this to the full board? Do you want to ratify as it's written here? Or it's.
I think it should be continued to the full board, for the same reason that I think the appellant, or the applicant, is asking for it to be re-reviewed. I think if it comes to consent, it depends on who sees it at consent, probably, and what the decision will be. And I think, as a board, it probably makes sense for us to have that conversation and have broader direction and a sense of where we sit as a board with this question. So I would make a motion that the minutes be amended to continue this project back to the single-family design full board at the earliest possible opportunity, and that the applicant return with photographs of installed conditions and architectural details that show edge conditions, ridge lines, and rake conditions for the proposed material.
I'll second that.
And under discussion, this is a part of a larger motion that involves the ratification of the entire scope of the minutes. Is that correct? Or is this a separate motion? It should be part of the motion to ratify the minutes and make an
Yes.
alteration.
Yes.
If you want to add that, I think that would
So
be
I'm-
best. And yeah.
That's correct. This is a motion to ratify the minutes and amend this particular item as previously stated. So if the seconder
Can
of
the
the
second-
motion
yeah.
can confirm whether they are in concurrence with the motion, please?
Yes.
Okay, if we could have a roll call, please.
All right, Chair Kalas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Graffitti,
Yes.
Board Member Lewis,
Yes.
Board Member Sherry.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, great. Okay, next item. Today, consent minutes. This was consent calendar for today, and Ms. Graffitti was present.
Can you just pause when there? That's great. Thank you. Where was my- Can you continue scrolling, thanks? Oh, can you go back to point 5 on the previous item? I just want to make sure that was clear. Okay, perfect, thanks. Keep scrolling to the notes there. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that. If we could have a roll call, please.
Chair Kalas,
I believe I have to abstain, actually. I don't know that I can second this. I have an item on this agenda.
Chair Claus, you can approve everything and abstain on that particular project.
Okay. So I'm
I'll
going to request
second
that
it.
somebody else second this so that it's not a conditioned second on the motion, please.
I'll second.
If we could have a roll call.
all right, Chair Kalas,
I concur with the exception of item A that I will abstain on.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Graffitti,
Yes.
Board Member Lewis,
Yes.
Board Member Sherry.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, so we will move on to item D, which is announcements, requests by applicants for continuances and withdrawals, future agenda items, and appeals. Does anybody from the board have anything to announce? Okay, staff.
Chair Claus, board members, a couple announcements. So today we have a training. It's part 1 of a 2-part series that staff will be providing. It's listed as item 3 on the agenda, so we're excited to provide that. Recently, I think it was last week, council voted and approved to forward any future SFDB appeals to Planning Commission. So that should be effective in about 30 days from now. And that's specific to SFDB. Any other design review appeals will still remain at City Council. Ted and Ellen are continuing to work on their SFDB process improvement efforts, and I understand Chair Kalas and Board Member Sherry have volunteered to be part of a working group, so they'll have several meetings over the summer, and we'll continue to provide updates on that. And then lastly, on June 6th, City Council, they upheld the SFDB project design approval for 3208 Laurel Canyon Road, and the appeal was denied. And that's all I have for today. Thank you.
That was a lot.
It really is, and if I could just say, I think it's, I'm really pleased that council made the decision to move SFDB appeals to the Planning Commission. I think that the Planning Commission is, unanimously supportive of taking on those appeals and are very familiar with design review guidelines and are very familiar with reviewing plans and kind of understand how boards think. And there's kind of a constant communication between our design review boards and our planning commission. So, and then from an organizational efficiency standpoint, I'm also very excited about the time savings that will allow staff time, to kind of free up staff time to continue to do things simultaneously, because planning commission appeals are all within kind of our community development department wheelhouse. So very much looking forward to them, but we've pretty much gotten through the appeals. We don't have any in the books right now. Fingers crossed.
Great. So just a question in regards to this shift of appeals to Planning Commission. I'm assuming we will still have a city council liaison in place. Is that accurate?
That's correct. So as written on every agenda, the city council liaison is Megan Harmon. We also have a planning commissioner liaison as well, and they regularly report back to each of their groups. I'm not as familiar how much reporting back to city council, but on a regular basis, there are updates to planning commission from the planning commission liaisons.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, I don't think we have any subcommittee reports unless you have anything to report in terms of process improvements.
No, this will really be something that the working group will be able to report out on that. This is an item where you could report out once we have those meetings.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so that'll close general business, and we are going to move on to 226 San Clemente Road, item 1 on the agenda for today. If the applicants could step forward and introduce themselves. They will have 15 minutes to present, and then we will have public comment for this item, questions by the board, comments by the board, and a motion, hopefully. So this project is here for concept review. It's located at 226 San Clemente Road. The project was revised after the first review to include an ADU. Proposals for additions to an existing 1,169 square foot, single-story, single-unit residence, and a 268 square foot attached garage consisting of a 493 square foot addition to the residence. 52 square feet of that is on the first floor, and 441 square feet is on a second floor. New 584 square foot ADU is also on the second floor. The proposed total of 2,536 square feet of development on a 6,035 square foot lot is 94% of the required maximum floor to lot area ratio. So this is a maximum, not a guideline floor area ratio. 2 zoning modifications are requested to grant relief from parking and interior setback standards. So we are here for concept only. No appealable decision will be made at this hearing, and we will have to make neighborhood preservation findings at the time of PDA. If you would please introduce yourself and your project.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Chris Cottrell, architect, and I'm with Cameron Casey, one of the owners.
And if I could interrupt, Chair Colossus, I do have a few comments before the applicant presents the project, if that's okay with you?
Please.
Okay, so I have, first of all, just a correction to the project description here. It wouldn't be an interior setback, it would be a front setback. And I'll get into that just a little bit in a second. The application for the project is currently incomplete, and the applicant is working on addressing our corrections and comments, and we wanted to get it in front of you at this time so they can get your comments as well and work on those things together. The current development on site was constructed in 1951 and is now non-conforming to front setback and parking requirements. The garage is a one-car garage only, and it does encroach into the front setback as it is now defined. So as proposed, the project would require a front setback modification to allow the garage to continue to encroach in the setback, just because of the extent of the work that's being done. And as this is a concept review, we're looking for you to consider broad concepts such as site planning, general architectural style, and the project's relationship to its site and neighborhood. And then we'll also be looking for comments on aesthetic appropriateness of that requested front setback modification for the staff hearing officer. And then just to kind of let you know, staff does have concerns that the project would result in substantial redevelopment, just due to the age of the building, the extent of the additions, and just things we've seen happen in the field with other similar projects. We're working on that with the applicant at this time. It's not been determined, but staff does have concerns about this. So if that was the case, the project would require a parking modification. They would likely propose one uncovered space in the driveway, which would be another front setback mod and a parking mod. So if you would like to comment on the aesthetic appropriateness of that situation as well, we're open to that, but it's not being proposed at this time. And I think with that, I'll let the applicant present the project. Thank you.
So one question, Ms. Burkhart. So if this house were to be completely raised and someone else were to buy it and come in here and develop something on it, can you please clarify for the board what the current parking standards and requirements would require of this parcel?
Sure.
Assuming a single-family residence and an ADU.
Okay, so 2 covered parking spaces would be required. That's the current requirement for single-family residential.
Outside of
And-
setbacks.
Correct. And then the ADU would not require parking.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, if you could, please go ahead.
Certainly.
We'll start the timer now.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, so this is in the coastal zone, so this is still under Title 28. So it's, if it were under Title 30, it would not require that same parking issue, because the coastal zone has that 50% rule, 1981.
Yeah, that's correct. You're adding 50% of, more than 50% of the existing floor area, so it kind of triggers that. But if there was nothing on the site and someone built a brand-new house, it would require 2 new spaces,
Right.
2 covered parking spaces.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, just a quick intro to how we got here. When we first submitted, I was clean shaven. It was back in November, so it's been 7 months to get in front of you. So I'm looking forward to shaving this now. No, I'm just kidding. Let's see. So we've gone back and forth. This is a tricky little project, and I'll take you through the little bits. We got staff comments. We adjusted to not have any modifications. We resubmitted. They found new modifications for us. So the main modification, we are proposing a totally conforming addition. There is an exception in our code that says if you have a totally conforming addition, you don't need a modification. There is no place for us to appeal that. So we just have to move forward with this modification. So that's why we're here today, getting your positive comments for this. It's a small little Mesa house. You guys are all familiar with this tract, built in 1951. It's a 1,200 square foot house with a single story attached garage. Let's see, let me bump down here and give you some flavor of this. I love being able to control this. Okay, here it is right there. This street, San Clemente, houses a bunch of different 2-story homes. It has been one of the more developed streets on the Mesa. We've got a few of those shown. These are neighbors. This is the house. This is 226. This is a neighbor down the street. This is across the street. Here's a survey. This is the existing single car garage that's bumping into the front yard setback by, I think we're at 2 feet. I'll get you the actual number in a second. And then this little dot right there on the corner of this garage, this is encroaching 6 inches into the side yard setback. Everything else is conforming. So those are our 2 main issues. Here is our survey. Here's some photos of adjacent or nearby two-story homes with their keyed in there. They're basically surrounding the house. It's all up and down the street. Let me jump into the survey here. So the green is our first floor additions. We're going to do a little bump at the entry addition, and then we're doing a bump in the back. Staff has concerns that this is going to be a tear down. We've got Ashley and Vance signing an affidavit assuring us that it's not going to be. We're reusing most of this house. So I'm not concerned about that. Let me jump to the next page. Oh, just a couple things. There's a second story deck, and I know you guys like to see how far it is away from the side property lines. It's in the back of the house, centered. We've really wedding caked this. We've hipped the roof, so this thing has an 8-foot second story top plate. It's kind of doing everything that the board, I think, would want in a second story addition on the mesa. So the deck is 15 feet away from the side yards. We've got flanking planters on both sides to really make that deck presence centered in the backyard. Let me skip to the demo plan. Okay, it's existing house, and there you can see that single-car garage. There was an addition done here with a bedroom and a bathroom. That's staying. This basic footprint is staying. When I toggle to the next one, you can see there's our front bump, there's our back bump. All these walls are staying. We're actually wedding caking in, so those walls need to stay there. Those footings need to stay there. We've got an exterior stair. This is up for the ADU. Interior stair through the kitchen. That takes you up to the primary suite. Here's the second story. Green is the primary suite. Purple is the ADU. So the ADU would be accessed from here. It's 2 bedrooms and a bath. Show you some elevations. Roof plans, all hipped out. Okay. This is the backyard elevation. They've got a little covered deck, that spiral stair up, and you can see the planters on both sides, cable rail, and horizontal siding, like a shiplap siding, will be white. Windows will be dark anodized, trim white, roofing dark. We've got an image on the front to give you an idea of that. This is the street elevation. So existing garage, right now the garage has got like one of those posts, so it's kind of an offset ridge on the garage. We're cleaning that up. The garage just gets a straight roof on it. This is their living room, and then front entry right there with a slightly higher roof than adjacent, just to make this a little bit more primary. You can see we've broken up the volume up top and broken up the roofs. This side view, I mean, these side yard views aren't really, there's a 6-foot fence here with hedging, so really no one's seeing this. The owners have talked to neighbors. Neighbors are in support. Let me get back to the front page. There's a little 3D view, and then I'll open it up to questions. Okay, bless you. All right, so the existing landscape in the front, this is all nicely done. This is going to stay. So if you can just imagine that on our little 3D down here. There you go. Okay, did you want to add anything, Cameron? No, you're good? Okay, thank you. I'm open for comments and questions.
Okay. The applicant has 8 minutes and 38 seconds left in case they need that to respond to anything. We will open this item to public comment. So I'll turn this over to staff for anybody in the audience, either here in person or online.
Thank you, Chair Kalas. Also, before we proceed with public comment, for the record, could the applicants just introduce themselves?
Chris Cottrell, architect, and Cameron Casey, owner.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and start with in-person public comment. So at this time, I haven't received any requests to speak. Just as a reminder, if you do wish to speak, you can fill out a speaker slip by the back door. Seeing no one move to speak, I'll go ahead and move to virtual public comment. So if you wish to speak on Zoom, you can go ahead and raise your hand at this time, and I'll call on you. I don't see any hands raised on Zoom, and we also did not receive any written correspondence for this item. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Kalas.
Okay, thank you. So I do want to take a second just to remind the board, in reviewing the meeting minutes from, I don't recall the date, but it was the West Mitchell Terrena item. I realized we started getting down into the weeds, and that was a conceptual agenda item. It was agendized for conceptual review, and that's what we're here for today. So I just want to make sure we keep this really big picture: size, bulk, massing, site planning. We don't need to get into the idiosyncrasies of the architecture at this point, aside from maybe, massing issues, roof line issues. Other than that, I would really encourage everybody to keep it big picture. I think we box ourselves in when we get too down in the weeds at this stage. So just a gentle reminder to everybody on the board that that's what we're looking at. If there's anybody who wants to dive in with questions, the floor is open for anybody on the board.
I have a couple questions. On projects over 85% FAR, the SFDB guidelines say that the applicant must provide a study of the FARs of the 20 closest homes. I was just wondering if you did that.
Thank you, Member Sherry. We requested to be relieved of that, which is something you can do,
Oh, okay.
which is kind of nice, right?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. The SFDB can waive that requirement, which would be great for the applicant if
Okay.
but that's up to you.
I just wanted to know, because one of those rule followers.
That holds true for the story poles as well, correct?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And you have an 8-foot plate on the upper level?
Correct.
And can you go to the elevations? There's just one thing I noticed, and it might be an optical illusion, but it looked like they're, like especially on the east elevation, if you zoom in on, not particularly the upper right-hand corner of it, looks like you have two different pitches. And I'm wondering why.
I do. This is back of house. The reason is I think originally we had a skylight above there, and to get the skylight in, I needed to pull that roof down. We can go back to this. Now the skylight is gone, we can make that work.
Oh, I see why you did it. Yeah, okay.
I don't think that would be seen, but except by an architect who's looking at it.
Just creates a little framing challenge, but,
Yes.
okay, I understand why you did it now.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No more questions?
Anybody else with any questions?
I've got a couple of questions, and I, as an architect with the concept review, like as much feedback as possible so that I don't move in and get my design complete and come back to the board with, a concept that isn't in the right direction. So that's just a secondary comment to the first comment. But yeah, I understand keeping it big picture. So I think my biggest thing in the 20 closest homes, you have that little diagram. Can you go back to that sheet?
And just to note, if we didn't have the ADU on there, this would be a 74% FAR. So the 580 square feet of ADU gets us to 94. Here you go.
Totally. I mean, you basically got the 20, or have the 20 closest homes there, with your 2 stories highlighted, and they're basically within, I think, your property, correct?
Yeah, they're on both sides of the street, up and down from the property. So property's there in red, and there are 3 on this side and 2 on either side.
And is it typical that that single-story garage is in that front setback along those 20 homes in your?
Most of the Mesa, that's what they did.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Or East Mesa, I guess.
Right, so it's just kind of a grandfathered in thing to have that, yeah, I mean, it's an existing condition. Okay. And you said the neighbors were support of the 2-story on both sides? You've talked to them about the glazing and?
Yeah, I think the neighbor to the south is actually, he rents out, so he's not there. It's a renter. Neighbors to the north are definitely supportive.
He's reviewed your concept plans and the window placements on the sides.
Yeah, they've shared the plans with the neighbors.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Fide, do you have any questions?
No.
Ms. Lewis?
No questions.
Okay. I have just a couple. So with what we're looking at on the screen, there's something that I'm assuming is discrepant between this and the floor plans. So you're showing the green as new construction, but from what I'm seeing on the, I'll call it the front or the street elevation, I'm assuming that you're either filling in the, is the black line your existing residence?
Correct.
Okay, I
Yep.
was looking at the red line.
Yep.
Okay, so
And
that's.
the orange is our second-story footprint.
Okay, question is moot then. Can we take a look at the floor plan for the second floor, please? Okay, what I'm looking at here from a sort of massing standpoint is the wraparound on the rear deck. It looks like it wraps around what I think you're calling the south side.
This is north, yeah.
Okay, so it would be the south east side then? Yeah, so that's accommodating some heat pumps or some condensers, it looks like.
Correct.
And then you have a series of planters there. Are those planters, like, do you conceptually think of those as being built in or movable?
You know, I'd like to do like the ore planter. They are movable, but they're fairly permanent. Just for waterproofing, it's just so much nicer to have. I mean, you guys know, rather than try to do a living space, you know. Yeah. So yeah, they would be permanent but movable. How's that?
Okay. And so in terms of how this deck is going to be used, it's primarily used, well, it's basically the ADU
It's
that's using it.
access. Yeah.
And I'm thinking about privacy of the easterly neighbor, which is why I'm asking these questions. So do you see that easterly portion of the deck being used, or do you see that as just being an access point for equipment repair and
Yeah.
access?
It's
or-
just access.
Can
I
you
mean,
talk
it's
through that?
Sure. It's about 3 feet between the condensers and the planters, so there's really no function for that except accessing these two condensers. So I think the deck would mostly be used in the middle.
Okay, and what is the total square footage of the deck?
Let me tell you accurately. It's got to be on here somewhere.
You can give me a ballpark, 200,
I'd say it's,
180?
yeah, I'd say it's 175 square feet.
Okay. Okay, and then if we can look at the site plan again, please.
Can we zoom in a little bit more?
Yes, please. I'm trying to understand the parking conditions a little bit more.
Yep.
So you're going to have one parking space on the site, is that correct?
Correct, as it is now.
So you're just retaining the existing condition,
Correct.
adding the ADU, which does not require.
Correct.
Okay. I don't think I have any other questions. Does anybody else have any more? Okay. Comments? Ms. Sherry, you went first. so-
No comments. I think it's, I think that from a size standpoint, I could approve the square footage, especially in light of the fact that the FAR includes the ADU. And I think the massing is appropriate because it steps back away from the front elevation from the street. And guess I do have one comment, and that would be to maybe consider the location of that skylight and make that slope the same. It might be easier for you, so.
Ms. Graffitti, do you have any comments?
As is, I would be supportive of the modifications. I know that's not the motion that we're making today, but just generally so you know where I stand. And then the only thing is, if the color's accurately presented in the rendering, to me that just feels very stark. So I think at the next stage, just looking at colors and seeing how white the white is, all of that, just because of the second story massing and how large the home is, I think that'll be important to make sure the color's right and can be compatible with that neighborhood. And that's it for me. Overall, I think it's a beautiful project.
Thank you.
Ms. Lewis, do you have any comments?
I agree with what's been stated already. And I think in comparison to the other two-story buildings on the street, I think this does a great job with the massing of setting back and the plate height. So I think the bulk works well, and I'm in support of the minor setbacks, that are having the 6 inch and the 2 feet, and the parking. I feel like it's in alignment with a lot of the rest of the neighborhood. And agree about the materiality. I like the planters also, creating privacy. I'm not concerned there. But it's the very tall hedge there between your neighbors.
Okay, great. Ms. Anderson?
Yeah, I won't repeat the comments made, but I am as well in support, driving the neighborhood, live in the neighborhood, and lucky you have lots of two-story examples in the neighborhood, and this will blend into that style and definitely enhance the neighborhood. So, yeah.
I agree. I think that you've been sensitive and you've attempted to step back most of the second floor from the side property lines, which I think is great. Can you confirm that the first floor plate height is going to remain at 8 feet?
No, the first floor is going to 8.6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Minor increase.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so I concur with the rest of the comments made. I would like to restate Ms. Graffity's comment about the colors. I know that the white and the black is kind of the poster child right now. It's what everybody wants. And 20 years from now, everybody's going to want something different. So there's some really nice examples of the horizontal wood siding with more contrast relative to trim colors in the neighborhood. And so I really would encourage you to consider alternate colors. You might also be happier with that ultimately from a maintenance standpoint because the white will get dirty and dingy. I can support the FAR given the size of the ADU. And I would support waiving the FAR studies, given that there are 4 or 5 second-story homes similar to this in the immediate vicinity. So I think there's plenty of precedence for the size of this in the neighborhood. Would anybody care to, I guess we're going to make a motion for comments, right?
Yes, we can summarize comments. If you can include your comments on supportability or aesthetic appropriateness, of the requested setback modification, and whether or not you feel it's ready to be continued to staff hearing officer.
Okay. Would anybody care to make a motion? Okay. Ms. Sherry?
Yeah, this would be for an indefinite continuance to the staff hearing officer with the following comments, that the board could support and takes no exception to the requested modifications for the front yard setback and the parking count modification, whatever that one is, and that the board finds the mass, bulk, and scale appropriate for the project. Number 3 would be the board supports the proposed FAR as presented and can support the waiver for the study of the 20 closest homes. And the board, let's see, then return with a color material board and consider a more, a muted white or an off-white siding in lieu of a bright white siding as it appears on the presentation currently. And then, do we need this to come back to full board? Or can we, this is a question for staff, can we send it to the consent calendar?
Chair Kalas, board members, you have the discretion. You can return it to the consent calendar.
Okay. So I'll throw that in there as part of my motion and see how it goes. That's my motion.
And Ms. Sherry, would you like to comment on story polls? Would you like to see story polls? Or
No, as part of, I guess it's number 3, support of the FAR and the.
So you're okay waiving all of?
Waiving all of the requirements for story polls, 20 closest homes. Board supports the FAR.
Okay.
I'll second that, and I'd like to ask the maker of the motion if they're willing to amend the motion as follows. That in regards to the waiver for the 20 closest and the story polls, that we make a statement in our motion that we don't feel that those are necessary due to the number of the 2-story residences that are already in proximity to the proposed project, and that one of the reasons that we can support the requested modifications and reduced parking is that it continues patterns of development that are historical in the neighborhood.
Yes, absolutely.
And I would like to request that the project return to full board, because I do think we need to look at the architecture just a little bit more closely.
Okay, then I would modify my motion to strike the last item of the motion. That would just be, the motion would be an indefinite continuance back to the full board.
Mr. Chair, could I ask one more question? We've got a 6-inch wall that if we're going to ask for modification, that is a wall that's encroaching. Could I just get a straw poll from the board if they were amenable to letting us keep, this is that side yard wall, it's 6.5 inches. This is the setback line. So right now we're proposing to move that wall. It would save the clients some money to not do that for 6 inches, which I don't.
Okay, so if we can take, we have a motion on the table. We're going to take a straw vote before we take a vote on the motion as to whether the board can support the 6.5-inch encroachment in the side yard setback, and if so, we will include that language in the motion that's on the table if it's amenable to the maker of the motion. So straw vote, all those who would be willing to support the 6.5 encroachment. Raise your hands, please.
I guess, but why are we coming up with this during the motion? Why did this come up now? You're just
I think
throwing
the
it out
applicant
there?
is requesting that we provide some statement within the motion related to this item. So
Okay.
before taking action on the motion, we are attempting to address that request.
Okay, so I have a question for the applicant, if it's okay. Why do you need the 6-inch encroachment?
It's existing, so it's just
Oh, it's
leaving an
existing. It's not the
condition.
upper level, it's the lower level.
Correct, it's the lower level.
So, and you're requesting a mod because you're making alterations?
Well, we're already having to go for a mod, so this is just another, this would be another mod on top
But
of
it's
it.
existing, so what's the mod for?
Because we are we're adding to it, and they're saying that, so since we're adding.
Oh, you're
to
adding
it-
that little bitty piece in back, that, just the extension, that one little corner. I get it.
No, no, that's just encroaching already, but that's encroaching into the side yard. So since we're encroaching into the front yard, we are getting a mod for that, but if we need to get a second mod, it'd be.
So you're going to need to restate the mods, and so technically, this hearing doesn't reflect that mod, but we're okay. It's okay for us to add it in our comments. So that
You can express that you would
Okay.
be
Yeah, I'm
okay
okay
with
with
it
that.
if they did come back with
Yeah,
it.
I
but
understand.
Right now,
It's-
it's not
Yeah,
proposed.
okay.
Okay, so I am going to, we have a motion on the table. It's been amended. It's been seconded. I'm going to ask the maker of the motion if it's acceptable to add language that the board can support the 6.5-inch encroachment on the westerly side of the residence when it goes to the staff hearing officer.
At the rear of the south?
We can be clear, what grid line is that, please?
The,
A3, yeah.
The 6.5 encroachment that is approximately on grid line A3 of the drawings before us.
at the rear of the residence?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that's fine to add
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll re-second that. We do have a motion on the table. If we could please have it read back to us for clarity.
So it's a continue to the staff hearing officer with return to the full board with the following comments. The board can support and takes no exception for the front yard setback and the parking count modification. The board finds the mass, bulk, and scale appropriate. The board supports the FAR as presented and can support the waiver for the study of the 20 closest homes because they don't feel that it is necessary due to the number of two-story residences that are already in proximity to the project. And then return with a color material board and consider a more muted white or off-white siding in lieu of bright white siding as it appears on the presentation currently. The board can support the 6.5-inch encroachment that is approximately on the grid line A3, I will clean this up, on the westerly side of the residence when it goes to the staff hearing officer.
I think that's correct. The only item that I think was lacking was the comment about continuing historical patterns of development related to the parking requests.
And also, I would like to clarify that you're supportive of the FAR waivers, all 5 requirements, which include the story poles,
Correct.
not just the 20 closest. Okay.
You have to add the story pole in there, I think. Correct.
I think if we say all 5,
All
or
five.
there are 5? All 4. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so motion as stated, cleaned up, and it's on the table. Could we please have a roll call?
Chair Kalas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Graffitti,
Yes.
Board Member Lewis,
Yes.
Board Member Sherry,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay.
Shave your beard.
I want to see you clean next time you come in. Okay, item 2 before us. Good job, board, we are right on time. 4 PM, review after final is requested for 1257 Farello Road. This is a proposal to legalize the as-built 105 square foot second-story deck and debate violations in enforcement case 2014, wow, 9 years old, 01142. The Single Family Design Board previously approved a 32 square foot Juliet balcony at this location. The project includes new privacy screening for the second-story deck. I'm assuming that's the as-built second-story deck. The parcel is located in the Hillside Design District, adjacent to a structure of merit to the east, and it is in the immediate vicinity of residences listed on the Historic Resource Inventory. Approval of review after final is requested. Plans must substantially conform to the plans that received project design approval. So before we have the applicant introduce themselves and present their project, I think that staff may have some background for us here.
Yes.
And I also want to acknowledge that we received a public comment item on this project, but we'll get to that during public comment.
Okay, so to board members, again, Ellen Kokenda, Design Review Supervisor. This is a little bit of an interesting situation where this project received project design approval and final approval. It started with an enforcement case and for a lot of as-built work. And had to go through the whole SFDB process, approval process, and then subsequently their building permit application, and they have an issued building permit to rectify some of the, many of the outstanding enforcement items that were identified with this particular 2014 enforcement case. And then as part of, well, they have an issued building permit, but it's never been finalized. So this particular applicant there's litigation with the city, and I don't need to necessarily get into that, but there's kind of a push from the city to get this over the finish line. And at one point in time, this particular applicant, again, as they were going through the SFDB process, there's a second-story deck question, and that was reviewed by a single-family design board is, again, as-built conditions, meaning that it was never permitted. It went before the SFDB at one point in time, and it wasn't entertained, and so what was received final approval from SFDB is a second-story Juliet balcony. It's been a handful of years since that approval, and this particular owner would like to reconsider that, and so generally, this is the type of project that would be a consent level project, but it's a review after final, and we're bringing it here to the full board because we know it's a very sensitive neighborhood, and there was a lot of participation at the time, and we kind of assume that that would still be the case. So the design is different than what is currently there, and the applicant can walk through their considerations and what's happened, but ultimately, I would say, this is kind of the last piece to get, like, that the applicant wishes to explore. And then ultimately, they need to finish their building permit or get that building permit finalized. But this is just a specific request for a second-story deck and stair to get up there. And the applicant can walk you through that. If there are any other questions about it, I can try to answer them. But
Okay, so before we get to that, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what I think I just heard. Okay, so presumably somebody purchased this home, there were as-built conditions that had been built without a permit or something of that nature. There was unpermitted work at some point in history.
unpermitted work, and this particular PLN record was to address all the unpermitted work and abate the violations called out in this enforcement case in 2014.
Okay, and then a building permit was issued for that. There was activity on it, but it's never been closed out. It's never been
Correct, meaning
finalized.
that there's still, like, the inspectors are going out there, you have to, does this match what was approved at SFDB? Does this match what was approved for the building permit set?
Okay. And you used some interesting language. You said at the time that this was reviewed by our board,
From what I understand.
something wasn't entertained.
So, from what I understand, when they were trying to get this second-story deck approved as it was constructed, meaning
Okay.
it was unpermitted when it was constructed without permits, and they were trying to get approval for that. And at one point in time, the SFDB, as I understand it, reviewed it, and the applicant ended up modifying the design because the board wasn't supportive of it as it was designed just as is, what's the current configurations of the unpermitted work. They were not supportive, and the applicant modified the design and approved, and ultimately what was approved is a Juliet balcony. So that's what we consider, that's what was submitted under the building permit application, and that is what was approved at the Single Family Design Board.
Okay, so currently, the applicant has the opportunity to build the Juliet balcony that was previously
They have
permitted.
an approved design with a permitted, an approved design for a Juliet balcony.
Okay.
And they are asking to reconsideration, they want basically to consider a second-story balcony that is different from same scale, but with modifications that this applicant will be able to walk you through. But essentially, it's maintaining the same footprint of the as-built second-story balcony.
Okay, so they're basically asking to keep what they have and maybe do something aesthetic to it or whatever. We'll wait and see what that is. You're going to tell us what that
Right.
is. Okay, does that clarify everything for everybody?
I have one more
Kind of
question, a quick question for staff is, can you just confirm for us as a board that, and for everybody else, that due process is being addressed here and that it is okay for an applicant who was possibly that the project was going to be appealed at one point and then can you go over
So
the fact
let me-
that it's okay to come back to our board now to ask for a change even though the project was denied in the state that?
So in terms of specifics, the applicant years ago, again, wasn't there for this time, but they presented a design that the SFDB full board wasn't supportive of. And I think there was a lot of neighborhood comments about it. They modified their design to get something that was approved, and that was approved with my understanding that it was never appealed, that it was like, okay, we understand the design. That wasn't an appeal, the Juliet balcony and the rest of the components of the as-built situation. It got through all of the things that we need it to get through to have a permitted situation or an approved situation. The reason, they have an option to come back to the Single Family Design Board because that design, although it was never, they didn't stick with that design. They modified it. They modified the second-story balcony. And so I have very much explained the process that there's no guarantee of an approval, but that this applicant, if they wish, can bring this back to this board for consideration. It's been a handful of years. And I said, if you bring it back without modifying it, that might be difficult for them to review. So it's up to you. So this particular applicant is aware of the situation, knows kind of what due process is in terms of knowing what the potentials are. And then they also recognize they have an approved project already with the Juliet balcony. So that's kind of the project before you. If, let's say, aside from this project, if there's a project that's denied, we staff, it's included in our guidelines, we don't entertain a project coming back within a year's timeline unless there's substantial revisions to it. And that's because if the board denied something, then we don't really want to take the time and do it all over again and kind of relitigate issues that have already been decided. So it's been a handful of years. And again, this applicant has changed things, so I felt comfortable scheduling this for a full board conversation. Again, I wasn't going to put this on consent, knowing that we'd have a lot of potential interest from neighbors, and I will let this applicant walk you through their considerations.
Okay, so I have one more point of clarification.
Yeah.
Sorry. You will get your turn, I promise. So originally, there was an as-built deck condition that was attempted to be approved. It did not. The Juliet balcony got approved. The applicant is in front of us today requesting effectively the same thing that they originally requested, but I heard that there's been modifications to the existing deck have those modifications already transpired, or are those modifications being requested now as part of an effort and attempt to retain the original deck?
The modification, the changes to the second-story balcony are attempts to try to mitigate potential privacy issues. And so it's a different configuration than what was seen years ago.
Are they in place on site already?
No,
Or are they a part
they are
of the
not. They are
drawings in front of
proposed.
us?
They are proposed. So the as-built condition still exists today, and that's what was originally tried to get approved. And so this applicant has made changes from the as-built conditions, is proposing changes from the as-built additions to try to mitigate potential privacy impacts. And that is what this applicant will be presenting to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the board for staff before we hear the applicant? Okay, please introduce yourself and walk us through your project as best as possible.
Well, thank you to staff. Hopefully I can make this less confusing. My name's Craig Minus. I'm with CAM Land Use and Development, and my role is the applicant planner. I'll be presenting our materials today. Eric Berg is also here. He's the attorney for the Maskerts, again, who are the owners of the property. Mr. Berg is here because the Maskerts have been sued criminally by the city attorney for code violations related primarily to the second floor deck. City attorney is aware that the deck was there when the Maskerts purchased the home. They are aware that the Maskerts did not build the deck, and they have been cooperative with us so far in not insisting on a trial date because they know that we're seeking approval of this as-built condition. So again, so the Maskerts can attempt to resolve the criminal case and avoid criminal penalties. So we've submitted 2 files, a plan set and an applicant presentation. I'll largely walk you through the presentation today, and we can refer back to the plans if needed. So this is us. Again, our request is a review after final to confirm legalization of the existing as-built second floor deck and to get approval as drawn, which includes the as-built existing second floor deck with considerations that we've introduced to respond to privacy issues that I think were a result of the previous discussion about modifying it to a Juliet balcony. So I wanted, these next few slides are a little bit of the permitting background, and it's confusing, I guess, to say the least. But I reviewed the case history, which does date back some time now. I believe there's evidence that the legalization of the existing second floor deck is there. I've included a few excerpts here from the related case that acknowledge the request to legalize the existing deck. So this is the PLN. There was a staff hearing officer that, I don't know if you can see that, but the proposed project is to legalize as-built development, including first and second floor deck. This was in approximately 2017. There was a building permit that actually was issued to permit the existing as-built development, including first and second floor deck. And then there was some discussion at the Single Family Design Board about that. Again, this was unrelated to the second floor deck. While I'm seeing that, it's very clear that there's a building permit that was issued in 2019 that includes a Juliet balcony. So I think that's something that we're battling with today, that the record does reflect the Juliet balcony is to be introduced. I understand from my client that there was a little bit of confusion in 2017 and at the Single Family Design Board about what if the second floor deck would be approvable and appropriate or not. And so I think at that time they did file an appeal and pay the fee to be able to come back for a review after final. So that's kind of the background.
If I'm, just really quick, there's no appeal for this. It was just simply requesting reconsideration, or they're submitting a review after final to reconsider the second
I
story
guess to
element. I just don't want to use.
preserve that option.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Just confusing with appeal language.
Sure, sorry for making this more confusing.
The other thing I would caution everybody is when we're using the word modification, so when we're talking about design changes to something, let's not call that a modification. That's a very specific language related to staff hearing officer. So I would just caution against the use of that unless it's appropriate language.
So this slide provides us a summary of the scope of work. So the issued 2017 and subsequent 2019 building permit included a vast scope of work, irrespective of the second floor deck. There were 9 substantial improvements that these owners were required to complete, and they've done so since. I've included a few of the inspection excerpts that show that they've been diligent in trying to satisfy this work. However, to complete these improvements, they're in need of resolving the second floor deck. And again, this is why we're here today on a review after final. So these are just some of the, I don't expect you to read them, but these are the inspection reports that illustrate we've making progress. So with regarding the process, we did pay the fee. So I think, I think we're trying to stay consistent with what the review after final process would be, and we've largely kind of been guided by the staff to do so. So again, I just kind of see where I'm at here. So in summary, my clients desire to complete all the improvements required by them as listed in this scope of work. Again, they purchased the property with the existing as-built deck as is. Their desire this entire time has been retain it as is. We've reviewed the existing deck and believe it's consistent with the design guidelines. We feel that it's not in violation with any setbacks and that it's consistent with other decks in the immediate neighborhood. We have taken it upon ourselves to respect the good neighbor policy and are offering to incorporate screening into the design, and I can walk you through that. The existing deck would remain, which is approximately 15 by 7 feet deep, approximately 105 square feet, and this is a very modest deck design. The removal of the existing deck to replace it for an approximate 8-foot wide by 4-foot deep Juliet balcony is not desired. So I'll kind of flip through these. Again, these are kind of our summary of why we're bringing this back to you. This is a slide that illustrates we're completely open and offering some sort of screening on the side of the deck, which is my understanding, the contentious item with the neighbors back in 2017. So we've looked at the neighborhood. There are other screening examples in the neighborhood, houses, next door and across from this subject property.
Pardon my interruption. Can I ask the applicant to zoom in? I think
Sure.
that people are having a hard time seeing.
Oops.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me get you there. Hold on. So I'll expand on this, but this is our property. This is the property to our immediate next door to us. These are properties across the street, and so we're looking at the immediate neighborhood and trying to incorporate some screening similar to this, similar to what they've done here, so that we can mask our balcony from this neighbor to the side of us. Let me zoom out a little bit.
So to the applicant, you have 6 minutes left of your presentation time, and I would encourage you to focus on the proposal in front of us.
Sure.
Thank you for the background, but I just want to make sure we understand what's being proposed.
Sorry, I have to zoom out here. So again, the proposal is to keep the as-built deck. Let me navigate to that, which is in the plans. So I think this is the best elevation of the deck. This is the approximate 15 by 7 deck with existing spiral staircase. The 2019 building permit replaced that with a approximate 8 by 4 Juliet balcony. So the footprint is not that larger of a footprint if we were able to retain the existing deck. Again, we are not in any setback. It's just a modest 105-foot existing deck. So that's the condition that we're looking at. What we're proposing is to include the screening. So this is the neighbor that I think was very concerned with this deck years ago. And so this is the side of the existing deck. What we're proposing to do is to get screening. Let me see if I can zoom in there. Include some screening on that side so the privacy is maintained, both looking onto and looking up from the adjacent property. So I think that concludes my presentation and available for questions.
And if I may just add, Chair Kloss, Ms. Garson has the approved building plans, if anybody wants to see what was approved existing.
Okay, thank you very much. Just for the record, the applicant has 3 minutes and 53 seconds left to respond if there's anything that comes up. So at this time, we'll open the project up for public comment, and I will turn that process over to staff.
Great, thank you, Chair Kalas. I'll go ahead and start with in-person public comment. At this time, I do have one request to speak. So I'll start with Michael Marzolo. If you could make your way up to the podium, you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Marzola. I live at 1265 Farello Road. We got one house between us and the current project. I've been a victim of this process. We recently were in front of you folks a while back, and I have to say I want to welcome the new members, and hopefully you'll be paying very close attention to what's being put in front of you, because in my opinion, there are some things slid past you in this past, with our past review, but I won't get into that. I wanted to talk to you about this project. I'm curious as to why it's in front of the board. In 2017, the current owners were told by the SFDB to remove the current non-permitted deck and give the option of replacing it, replacing the non-compliant deck with a 3-foot, I guess the Juliet balcony. They refused to remove the deck, and now this is currently an enforcement case. The owners have a court date on July 20th because there are numerous violations of the property. The owner has failed to obtain permits for numerous remodeling projects and now are facing an enforcement hearing in Santa Barbara's court. Perhaps they are thinking because the SFDB has so many new members that they can manipulate the system and somehow get approval for their deck, and then take the decision to the court hearing and avoid the consequences. Basically, I hope you're not going to be fooled. Research the property at 1257 Farella Road, and you will find numerous violations. This is currently an enforcement case to be heard by a judge. The SFDB should not even consider this case until after the enforcement hearing decision. And I want to thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marzola.
I do have a few other requests to speak, so I'll move on to Chris Newhouse. You can make your way up to the podium, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi. I'm Christine Newhouser, and I walk that area. I don't understand why this property with a second-story deck off of the cantilevered second story protruding into the backyard is allowed to come to Single-Family Design Board for review after final, when the building zoning violations were never addressed. Instead, the owners have stalled for years and make another attempt to circumvent what they were officially told to fix and come before you, hat in hand, while they ignored the issues that have caused the city employees, the board members, and the neighbors to waste their time for years. That is, if the corrections are never made. Excuse me. This deck steps forward, encroaching on the neighbor's backyard privacy. But as important is that this is another example of people asking for forgiveness instead of asking for permission and doing what's right. It's almost like the applicants that return to you all over and over when you have told them to do something and they just ignore it. And again, so you're here and it's great and everything else, but so if it's been 9 years and they haven't done anything, so they get whatever you all agree for them to do, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. So, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Neuhaus. Next.
Up next, we have James Brinkman. If you can make your way up to the podium, you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Why are we really here? Over the last 6 years, the homeowners have refused to abate numerous building violations on their property, the second-story deck being just one of the violations. They had the option of simply abating the violations as specified in their approved plans, but instead, they decided to request a reversal of a 2017 SFDB decision, which reads as follows: removal of the second-floor deck in its entirety to be replaced by a small 3-foot balcony as an acceptable alternative. The appeal process is available for those who wish to reverse board decisions. It is interesting to note that the individual in question filed for an appeal with the required 10-day period following the SFB decision, but then decided shortly thereafter to withdraw their appeal. Using the review after final to challenge an SFB decision lacks transparency and due process. The planning department is exempt from notifying interested parties of a potential reversal of the SFDB decision. It is our understanding that decisions made are not appealable. There is no requirement for a site visit. In an appeal to City Council, concerned parties have 20 minutes for comments, but in a review after final are reduced to just 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Emma Brinkman. If you can make your way up to the podium, you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
I have a couple of images for the. Okay. Should I start? Okay.
Yes, go ahead. The clock will
Hi,
start
I'm
when you do.
Emma Brinkman. I live at 1261 Farella Road. I brought a couple images for you to look at. Image 1, there are currently 2 permitted balconies on the second story. I have taken the liberty to illustrate the south-facing balcony located above the as-built solarium. The second, larger balcony is located on the northern side of the house, above the as-built entry. With the approved Juliet balcony, it makes for 3 points of access to the exterior of the second story. Image 2.
If we can we put
Oh.
this up on the screen?
Oh.
For the board's benefit, please, for everybody's benefit.
I could ask City TV to, if you put it right underneath the camera, and if City TV could zoom down on that image. And Chair Kloss, if you could help us out, center it. There we go.
We're getting there.
It's upside down, yeah. So the image that the applicant showed you was devoid of the part that I kind of took liberty at to fill in, which is the existing balcony that is above the solarium. And I don't have an image for the second deck on the north side. So I thought this would let you kind of know that there's already a balcony there on the same elevation. So it's kind of redundant to have another, in my opinion, anyways. So image 2, which is a picture of our backyard. And you can see that we are totally in the direct sight lines to our entire rear yard. As you look at this image, please imagine the proposed screen wall on the deck as opposed to the already approved Juliet balcony from a design standpoint. The 2017 board approved the Juliet balcony as a compromise. It is disappointing that my neighbors, 6 years later, are still unwilling to accept this compromise. Thank you. Questions, anything?
Thank you. No. Do you, we're going to keep these, is that okay for the record? Okay, thank you.
Chair Colossus, we're going to need a copy for our public record.
Ms. Lewis would like to look at them. No, I was asking if we could keep them for public record.
If I think someone,
Ms. Lewis wants to.
Board Member Lewis would like to see them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, at this time, I haven't received any other speaker slips, so I'll go ahead and move to virtual public comment. If you wish to speak on Zoom, at this time, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you.
City TV can turn the camera off, please, of my notes. Thank you.
I don't see any hands raised on Zoom at this time, but we did receive one written correspondence from James Brinkman, and with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Colossus.
Great, thank you. Okay, so at this time, questions from the board for the applicant. I have one question. I'll just start. So the exterior elevation that you showed us, can you go back to that? I guess that would be the south elevation, please. Okay, so what is being proposed relative to what appears to be an existing solarium and the balcony on the, I believe it would be the east end of the southerly wall on the second floor? Do those in fact exist? Do you acknowledge the speaker's accuracy of the photo that was brought up? Or I'm trying to understand if we have an accurate existing south elevation before us or not.
I would have to review the file. I don't know if the public comment is correct or the elevation is correct.
So you have not been out to this job site to take a look
I've
at this?
absolutely been out to the job site.
So is there a solarium on the home?
Yes, the solarium is part of the project scope of work that's included in the 2017 building permit.
And that's being as-built permitted as part of that?
Yes, yeah, that's part of the 2019 building permit. That's the list of,
Okay.
that's inclusive of this comprehensive list that the owners are required to complete.
Okay, so as part of what's in front of us today, are you proposing that that solarium would remain? Or how is it being addressed in the past permit versus what's in front of us today?
Well, I'm in front of you today to address the Juliet balcony and the, retaining this existing as-built.
I understand, but we need to know what this home is going to look like on the south side when it is in its final form between the existing building permit and what you're proposing today. So does this drawing in front of us, this south elevation that you're calling an exiting south elevation, is that the final configuration that you're proposing for that south elevation, or will the solarium remain with the French door above it and the existing balcony?
Yes, I believe it will.
Okay.
And Chair Class and board members, we have the approved building permits to show the south elevation so you can understand the context.
That would be helpful to look at if we could. Okay, so this was these were the drawings that were brought before us or before our board in 2017?
This is what the Single Family Design Board approved, and what you're seeing here are the building permit plans, and you see this approval stamp in the bottom right-hand corner. So when zoning staff reviews, when we do our zoning review, we also do design review compliance. So this is what was approved by SFDB. And you can, in the middle is the Juliet balcony, and you can see on the right is what has been approved deck-wise for this south elevation.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful from both of you. I had a couple other questions. I'll just fire them off since I dove in here. So you are proposing to keep the spiral stairs that were previously approved to be removed. Is that correct? Okay. Do you know how far the side property line is from the edge of the deck that you're proposing to retain or to keep from each property line?
I don't have it noted on the plans, but I think it's well outside of a side yard setback.
Okay, we have a guideline that I think wants us to be, what, 12 or 15 feet back? So I'm trying to ascertain whether the two ends of the deck are 15 feet back from property line or not. Can you speak to that?
I'd be happy to clarify that, but I don't have that information today.
Chair Kloss, we can pull up, I can ask Ms. Johnson to swap. So for context, Ms. Garson can show you where there's the 10-foot interior setback.
Chair Kloss, board members, if you can see where my cursor is on the screen, this indicates from the property line inward, that's the 10-foot interior setback. So if you can imagine, you know, at least another 10 feet inward, and here is the Juliet balcony.
Okay, so we're well outside of that on the westerly side. How about the easterly side? There's a 10-foot setback line there, it looks like, at the roof line.
That's correct. Up here where my cursor is, that's about 10 feet from the property line. So again, approximating another 10 feet inward, the Juliet balconies there.
Is the dash line around that the existing?
I believe so.
Can you zoom in, please?
It's probably more like right on the 15.
Do you have anywhere in this set the proposed floor plan and elevation? I'm looking through your drawing set. I see an existing deck that's missing the stairs, but I don't see the stairs. I don't see proposed. And just
I
this
have it, the
one
proposed
side.
deck from this angle, kind of trying to illustrate the screening. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not showing my,
Oh, we can see it.
okay. So let me zoom in there. And again, if you need additional design drawings, we're happy to provide those. But to answer your question, I have it from this side where we wanted to illustrate the voluntary screening.
Right, I think what I'm confused about, and sorry to hijack what you may have been your questions, but there's a stair coming in there, so it's hard to see exactly where this is intended to go in plan, and in plan, we don't see the stair, so how do we see this wall?
You mean the spiral staircase?
Correct.
The spiral staircase would go from the second floor deck to the first floor deck.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I don't know how the wall will intersect. I believe from photographs, but it's hard to see because we don't see it on the floor plan. But from the elevation, the one that you look at, the south elevation view, if you go on your previous page, you're showing a screening that runs the full length there, but it would intersect where your stairs are. So really, it's only hitting a portion of that. Is that correct? And is that the
Yeah,
only place
that's
the
true.
screening goes? And then the screening doesn't, go anywhere else?
I think that it's intended for the screening to screen the, what would it be, a 7-foot projection. I acknowledge the drawing could do a better job at providing how that staircase relates.
Well, because what I don't know is if the stairs say 3 feet wide, are you now only screening 4
foot
feet?
six.
Or, you know,
The intent of what we're bringing today is to screen the entire balcony.
do you know the width of your stair?
I don't have that off the top of my head,
Okay.
no.
So-
Again, I'm happy to provide this additional design detail, I think.
So if we're in plan view, if this is the back of the house, if this is the existing balcony, and there's a spiral stair that comes up like this, and you walk up here, there's no way to put screening here because you can't walk through it.
Understood.
So is the intention to screen from this point back to the residence on the west side, and then to screen this whole portion on the east side?
The intention, and again,
This is my beautiful
Can we
drawing.
turn the camera to
Yeah,
see
right,
her
just-
If I
drawing
could
so
ask
everyone's aware?
City TV
Thank
to
you.
point down to Chair Colossus'
My
drawing.
just lovely drawing here. Okay, so if this is north, this is the spiral staircase, this is the existing second floor balcony, this serves the balcony, so the question was to reiterate with this drawing in front of us whether the intent is to screen this portion between the back of the house and where the stair comes into the balcony, and on the east side, this full 7'6".
the intention of the screening is to screen it to the maximum extent possible. I recognize the drawing doesn't illustrate that, but we want to do the best we can to make that private for.
Do you want to draw in black what you mean by maximum? Because that would be all the way around.
Absolutely, yeah.
Clear.
I understand there's a conflict with the staircase, and that likely needs to get resolved, but, I mean, we want to screen,
So you'll screen past the stair, not on the deck?
the staircase as drawn is a conflict, I understand that. What the intention of what we're trying to do is to screen the entire deck. I realize that we probably need a modification to the drawing. Excuse me, I won't use modification, edit to the drawing.
Thank you.
But the intent is, again, to adhere to the good neighbor policy. We want to screen the deck as best we can. If that means, moving the staircase, we'd be happy to do that. I think first and foremost, the question was if there's an ability to retain this as-built deck, or if we have to go back to the Juliet balcony. That's why we're here today. Again, I see the conflict in the drawing. We don't have to reiterate that. If I have to resubmit a drawing, I'm happy to do that. But before we get that far, I first needed to kind of understand if there's consideration to keep the existing as-built deck.
Okay.
So to answer your question, I'm sorry, we want to do the maximum screening possible. And if this board has some suggestions on how we're doing that, we're completely open to that.
Okay. Can you tell us what the materials are of the existing deck that is being proposed to be maintained? So it appears to be, can you just tell us what the materials
Yeah,
are for the
it's
deck
wood
itself
framed
and the
it has
hand
an
railing?
existing Trex floor.
Can you go to that photograph that shows that, please? And just tagging on to that question.
And then also the guardrail, can you, what is the guardrail material? It appeared to be steel that was not painted when I saw it in the photos, but I can't tell for sure.
So I understand the framing to be wood. There's some sort of cable railing that exists. I imagine the cable railing and the top railing is metal.
Do you know if it's painted, anodized, aluminum, stainless,
I don't know
steel?
that for sure. I recall it's black material.
You said you had followed the good neighborhood guidelines, or were trying to the greatest degree possible. Did you reach out to neighbors to discuss this project that's before us today before submitting for review after final?
I believe the owner has had a lot of correspondence with the neighbor. I have not directly reached out to them.
Okay, those were all of my questions. I don't know if any other board members have any other questions.
I just had one quick question about a piece of paper that came up on the screen earlier, and it was a mod resolution that, that might have said at one point, or it was alluded that at one point there was a modification approved that in support of the as-built deck. Is that correct? And then it went back to
So if I
SFDB
can-
not being in support of it? I'm just confused by that piece of paper that, yeah, that one. What,
So can you go back to the south elevation? So there's multiple decks, and I just want to confirm that sometimes you'll see in the bottom, if you zoom into the south elevation, there's a portion of the stairs that are encroaching into the interior setback. So if you zoom in for everybody. You're gonna have to just do the old fashioned, make everybody ill, kind of zoom in. Okay, so if you could point out, if you can draw the line of the setback.
That's
You
the
see
mod.
And then you see the portion of the stairs on the lower, that portion required an interior setback modification from the
It had
staff
nothing to
hearing
do with the
officer.
as-built upper level deck. That's what it was. I think Mr. Minus was I think you're the one that put it on the screen, and I just wanted to make
Right.
sure that.
I was a little
it
nervous
wasn't-
when I didn't even bring it up, the modifications, the staff hearing officer approved modifications, because it's really unrelated to this
Exactly.
particular request that is before you today.
Got it, thank you.
I think the reason I articulated all that is because, again, I wasn't involved with this property in 2017, but as I reviewed the file, there were a number of case file that talked about the legalization of that second floor balcony. So again, I completely acknowledge that there's a 2019 building permit that has a Juliet balcony. I understand that, but I think the point of me bringing that up was I think that the case file shows that there was consideration for that existing second floor deck to be legal. And again, that's why we're before you today, to try to illustrate that, to try to show that while the owner is required to do the Juliet balcony, I understand that, but we're trying to present a solution completely open to screening. I understand there's some conflict with the drawing now, but if we were conditioned to come back and show you a better drawing that satisfies that screening and the staircase interaction, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. I have another question for you. Can we see the south elevation again, please? So there appears to be a large post that supports the second floor deck. When you look at the photo that you just had on the board versus this south elevation, it appears as though there's a large 6x6 or maybe a couple of 2x or 3x that are laminated up together, maybe bolted through to support the center of the deck. So can you go back to the photo that you had a moment ago showing the rear elevation? And it looks like it has 2 floodlights on it. Do you see that there?
these, yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh. So that is not being shown on this drawing, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And is the intent for that post to remain?
The intent would be to remain.
Okay. So the only change, as I understand from what is existing or what we're seeing in the photos, the only thing that you're proposing to change to that in order to for lack of a better way of putting it, appease our board for an approval is the horizontal slat screening. Is that a correct statement? You're
Yeah.
not changing the spiral staircase or the detailing or the color of the wood or anything like that. You're just proposing that screening element. Is that correct?
Yes, I would put it that way in those words. I mean, we're not trying to appease your board. What I'm trying to
That was a
represent-
clumsy word. I just couldn't find a good word there.
I
Sorry.
mean, in summary, again, the owners would like to retain it as built, and it's probably best reflected in this photo as opposed to drawing. I realize there's some omissions in the drawing, and I apologize for that. But the intent of why we're in front of you is, again, to retain the second floor deck as built, to incorporate screening to the full extent possible. I understand that we need to study that further with respect to the staircase. But what I'm trying to tell you is that we're completely open to screening that. I understand that that was the point of contention back in 2017, and probably what necessitated the alternative as the Juliet balcony to pull that back. So we looked at the neighborhood, we looked at other screening examples that were in the neighborhood, and given that this is an as-built, given that it's not within a setback, and given that it's generally a modest existing balcony, we thought that incorporating screening is a good design element, and it should address many of the neighbors' concerns.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I apologize that the drawings are not, as tight as they
Okay,
should be.
I have another question, so we can move this on.
We're just trying to get
No more
clear on
apologies,
what's
it's all right, Craig. Let's just
Yeah.
move on.
Go ahead.
And I have one more
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Are you proposing screening because you want it or because you think the neighbors want it?
Well, I think both. I know that the client would like to retain the deck. I know that the client is aware that,
Does the client want, my question is, does the client want the screening? Like, are they going to lay out naked and that's why they want it screened? Or do they want the screen, or are they proposing it because of the neighbors?
they would like the deck to remain as is.
Okay.
That's it. That was it. That was the
That's it.
answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to close the question period, and it's board deliberation time. So this is our turn. Thoughts?
I can go first. Number one, I feel like we do not have sufficient drawings for what is proposed to give adequate design guidelines. But separate from that, I do think, on page 69N, it says that it discourages decks larger than 3 by 7. And I can understand that that was part of the impetus for the Juliet balcony. And also the design that we saw on the screen for the balcony included more architectural detailing than the picture we are seeing here of the deck. Those are my initial comments.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Does anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, or go ahead.
Yeah, just agree with Ms. Lewis's comments. We need clarified drawings to make sure that, because we don't know, you're saying that you want to propose both sides, but we're not seeing that in the drawings. And is it solid screening, or is it open Trex? We need some more information on that. And the length, does it match the deck and how the stair terminates
Sure.
into it? And communication with neighbors on both sides. And then if there's any other architectural painting, staining improvements that you're planning on making as well. And of course, if you can confer the setbacks, then it would be a lot easier for us, thank you for, yes, cleaning up, legalizing the violations. When you purchase property, you got to do it. So, it's great. We want to get you through. But we need complete information in order to do that.
Ms. Sherry?
Yeah, and I don't even know how this project made it to this point because there's so much missing, and it's kind of a waste of everybody's time to even look at something like this. So I agree with needing drawings that represent what you want, and in plan view and in elevation view, there's not, the approval here is for a screen, and there's not really an accurate location of the screen or where the screens are going to go, and we spent a lot of time talking about it, and we still don't know where they're going to go. So I think that if moving forward to an approval, because that's where I think we need to be, is if the deck is appropriate and follows the good neighbor guidelines in terms of being set back away from the two side neighbors, then it really becomes an issue of what does it look like and how appropriate is it to the architecture. So to come here to ask us to approve that particular deck, I would say you probably don't have a really good chance of that. And if the applicant, if the owner really wants to come back and really wants a deck and it does abide by the good neighbor policy with setback from the sides and it's appropriate to the architecture, I'm not even so sure you need to have these big screens surrounding it. I'm not necessarily sure that would even help the architecture. I think it's more about a design of a deck that is in keeping with the existing style, and then come back with accurate drawings that reflect that. Yeah.
Do you have any comments, Ms. Gervais?
Yeah, just need more information and the questions that we've asked. It appears to, the as-is deck today appears to not encroach into the 15-foot setback, but it would be really helpful to know that for a fact. And go from there. I'd be open to it, but I just think that we need more information at this point and feel good that we're looking at complete drawings and all of that. Thank you.
I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. I don't even know why we're taking the time to look at this right now. We don't have accurate drawings that reflect what the south elevation is. We don't have any detailed drawings that show how the screening is going to interface with the existing guardrails. We don't know what any materials are. In order for us to approve something, we have to make a neighborhood preservation finding. One of those findings is that this project has to enhance the neighborhood. When I look at this and I think of the neighborhood that this is in, there's no way that it does that. It does not rise to the level of enhancing the neighborhood. I drove by the house. I peeked down the sidelines to the greatest degree that I could. I went below it. I got a glimpse of it from below. I drove down to Milpas Street. You can see this from Milpas Street. You can see this from Santa Barbara Junior High. This is visible from town. So it absolutely does need to rise to the occasion. And I think the biggest problem that I would have with this is that there's no architectural cohesion on this house at all. Colors, details, it's organic at best. And so you're asking us to keep something, and I think this is sort of what Ms. Sherry alluded to. You're asking us to keep something, but you have not demonstrated to us that it is consistent with a high architectural quality that exists now or will upon completion. And furthermore, I'm concerned about the massing of this deck, regardless of privacy issues and anything else, because when you look at the real condition on that south elevation as shown to us from the neighbor, as well as what we see in the approved drawings, the massing feels very different than the south elevation that has been presented to us today. What we saw today was a long linear balcony down at a low level and what feels proportionately like a much smaller balcony up above with a spiral staircase. That's not what's happening. There's a balcony here, there's a balcony here, there's a solarium here, there's a big long balcony. There's a lot more going on this south elevation than what has been brought to us today. So I am frustrated because I feel like we have a lot of projects and there are a lot of applicants who are waiting for a place in line. And we have incomplete information that has been brought to us today that borderlines on being disingenuous. And so I don't see how we can make a motion today, and that frustrates me because I feel like there's pending litigation, and now I feel like we're being a pawn so that when somebody goes to the judge, they can say, by the way, we've got something in motion with the city planning department right now. From the standpoint of being the chairperson for this board, I take exception to that if that is a strategic plan. So I am going to say that we're not going to make a motion on this today, and it can be continued indefinitely back to the full board. That's my motion until appropriate and complete drawings are brought before us that illustrate existing and proposed conditions accurately, as well as all material details, connections, finishes, colors of the house at large, as well as the balconies and any other adjunct components of the home. That's my motion.
I'll second the motion with the comment that if it's okay with the maker of the motion, that we add something to the effect of, or maybe it's just a side note to you. Doesn't have to go in the motion, just a side note.
Then let's just hold that until we
then
make the motion.
Okay, but I wanted, under discussion, since I seconded the motion, under
Okay.
discussion, I just want to say that, like I was saying in my comments, just put your best foot forward on what you want this deck to look like and come to us with what a really great deck would look like.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table for this to be continued back to the full board. Can we take a roll call, please?
Chair Kloss,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Graffiti,
Yes.
Board Member Lewis,
Yes.
Board Member Sherry.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Chair Colossus, board members, would we like to take a break before we start the next item?
Yeah, if we could recess for 5 minutes, that'd be great. going to reconvene the single-family design board meeting for Tuesday, June 20th. And we are starting item 3, which was originally calendared for 4:30. This is board member training and discussion, and I believe that Mr. Hamilton is here to help us out.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Colossus and board members. My name is Ted Hamilton Roll, and I will be facilitating today's training and discussion. So this is the first of 2 sessions. Today, we're going to talk about the path of a development project and give you a behind-the-scenes look at what staff does to put a project on your agenda. Next, we'll talk about SFDB in the municipal code, so discussing the rules, regulations, findings, and guidelines that govern what SFDB does. And then in session 2, which is tentatively scheduled for July 17th, we'll take a deep dive into the design guidelines and talk about neighborhood compatibility, what it is, what it isn't, and how to evaluate it. Lastly, before we dive in, each of you has a reference packet with materials related to our training topics. I recognize there's a lot of material in there, so you're welcome to follow along if you would like, but if you'd like to save that for the discussion period at the end of this, you're welcome to. And the first document we'll be looking at is the Planning Application Guide. Also, we're going to save public comment on this item for the end, so that the public has a chance to weigh in on anything that was said. We'll start with the steps of a development project, and for now, I'd like to focus on the 3 application submittal points within the process, and those start with step 1, which is a pre-application. This is optional but highly recommended. It is generally for bigger projects, but anyone can submit one. The context you'll see this in is as a design review pre-application consultation, which is kind of a mouthful. But what it is, it's just a chance for applicants to present a sketch of a project, a really preliminary plan, and get initial design feedback. The comments you give in that context are non-binding, and the applicant can return later for a formal application, which brings me to step 2, which is the formal planning application. This is required for all discretionary planning approvals, and this is the formal application for a decision, and I'll get into that in more detail momentarily. I'll also get into the steps of design review momentarily, and the last step in this process is the building permit. So once the planning application has been approved, the decision maker has made their determination for approval, then the applicant can submit for a building permit. And once that's issued, then construction commences. So step 1, step 2, and step 6 are the 3 application points within the development process. And again, this is general. There are variations to this, but this is most applicable to SFDB projects. Once someone submits a planning application, staff begins their behind-the-scenes review for application completeness, and this consists of 3 elements. The first is a check of the application materials, pretty basic. So does the application include plans, photos, and other minimum requirements? Next is a land development team plan check, or otherwise known as the LDT plan check. And at this stage, staff asks, are there any major code compliance issues that would require a redesign? There are about 20 different reviewers from the various departments of the city, community development, public works. However, for most SFDB projects, generally only about 5 of those look at the projects. So that would include zoning, creeks, fire, transportation, and water resources. So the third step, whoops, got ahead of myself. Third step is environmental review. The city is required to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. And at this stage, we ask, does the application include enough information to make that determination? And here we can ask for information such as biological reports, archaeological reports, to be able to have enough information. So while staff is reviewing an application for completeness, the 3 stages of design review may begin, starting with the concept review. So at this stage, the board should be asking, and this is where the board's role comes in right here. At this stage, the board should be asking, are there make it or break it site or structural planning issues? Is the project an appropriate size and scale for the site and the neighborhood? Is this a generally approvable project? And at this stage, you can ask for visual aids, you can ask for neighborhood context studies, and address major structural and site planning questions. In addition, you have the ability to waive certain submittal requirements at this stage if you think there's enough neighborhood context info already in the application, and you're really responding to the applicant's information that they're presenting. So, after concept review is project design approval. At this stage, staff has deemed the application complete, meaning that we've vetted the project to not have any major code compliance issues that would require redesign. We've decided that there's enough information in it to put it in front of you for a project design approval determination. And this is the substantive project approval. So at this stage, you should be asking, is the project acceptable? Is it compatible with the neighborhood? And do you have enough information to make the applicable findings? The third stage of design review is final approval. So this is the review of project details, such as exterior finish materials and colors, and you'll be looking at whether the final approval plans and the structural details that go along with those conform substantially to the project design approval plans. And I really want to emphasize that out of all these 3 stages, we would like you to be asking for the most information upfront at concept review. It's to your benefit and the applicant's benefit, everybody's benefit, to get that information upfront and early on. So feel free to ask for as much information as you think you'll need to make that project design approval determination. So any action by the SFDB may be appealed, and the 2 actions that the SFDB makes are project design approval and final approval. A request to appeal an SFDB decision must be submitted within 10 calendar days of that decision being voiced. And as you may know, SFDB appeals now go to Planning Commission instead of City Council. That's the only board out of the design review boards where that's applicable right now. And as a reminder, an appeal of project design approval, or an appeal of the project design approval decision is an appeal of major, the substantive approval, the site design, size, bulk, and scale, site planning, configuration, and that sort of thing, big issues. And an appeal of final approval is limited to only what's presented that's new at final approval, such as the colors and materials maybe not being in sync with the architectural style, or the plan's not substantially conforming. So what I'm trying to say is the scope of a PDA appeal is much larger than the scope of a final approval appeal. All right, so that concludes my presentation for the first section. Let's get into questions and discussion, and we'll start off with the first 2 questions, which are more about what you just heard and the general process, and then we'll go through, I'd like to ask a more specific question, number 3, about any struggles you've been having with reviewing projects and preparing for hearings. So let's start just by asking any questions about the review process prior to public hearings.
The only question that I have that I think would be helpful for others to know is when the clock starts ticking in terms of the state mandated 60 days. Streamlining requirement.
Thank you, Chair Claus. And board members, that's a really good question. So the city is subject to timelines under the State Permit Streamlining Act, and the clock starts ticking once the application has been deemed complete. So that deemed complete date that we send our completeness letter notifying the applicant is that start of the 60 days. The applicant and staff can work together to figure out an extension. There's a one-time extension of 90 days that's allowed, and that has to be mutually agreed upon in writing in order for that to occur.
Thank you.
I noticed some projects, especially on consent, kind of have sometimes combined stages like PDA and final. Is that just the level of completeness and the applicant just wanting to expedite the process? And or like, why does that happen? And what are those cases? Just out of curiosity.
Great question. Thanks, Board Member Graffiti. So at consent, the projects are generally smaller. There's just generally less to review in the scope of work. So the idea with consent is that it can be, a one hearing wonder. You can get the project through basically in one hearing with project design approval and final approval. And at this stage, and if you like, you can refer to the final approval checklist in your packets. At this stage, staff will be vetting the project, both that it's complete and that it has enough information for final approval. So it's coming to you kind of as a double whammy that way, I guess. We've done both those sets of review. And I think does that answer your question?
I might
Or Ms.
add one
McCandless?
other thing, because Ted's right, and I think what you'll notice, if you're the consent reviewer, you're often not going to see a project on for concept at consent. Usually it's going to be scheduled for PDA or PDA and final, and we kind of skip the consent. There are some exceptions to that when what really bothers applicants and architects is that they want to get to the design, they want to get to you all ASAP. But sometimes as part of the application completeness process and our behind-the-scenes staff review, there's SWIMP issues and there's transportation challenges, and it's all city policy stuff that's really making the getting the application to a completeness point. So sometimes a consent project will be scheduled for concept because we just want to get the applicants some information on, is this even, if I finally get to the point where the city is ready to give me the thumbs up, is SFDB even going to be okay with this? So occasionally, again, rare, you'll see a consent item on concept, but ideally this is supposed to be minor projects to just get them on for project design approval as fast as possible.
And not to complicate things further, but I know another question that has come up is sometimes at full board, there are projects that are scheduled for the very first time for project design approval. That's rare. We don't see that a lot, but that is possible as part of our process. And what that means is they submitted, the applicant submitted, and they've met all the basic requirements. They've been deemed complete. And in order to try to reduce the number of hearings that project has to go through, we just schedule it for PDA right away so that if the board feels that they can make those findings, they can just do it at that hearing.
Right, so that's an important point of clarification for the board and the public, that we cannot make a motion for a subsequent level of review if the project is not agendized for that. So if it is agendized for conceptual, even though we may think it's ready for PDA, we cannot give it that. Or if it's agendized only for PDA and not final, we cannot give it final. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
But I would encourage this board to kind of think big picture, and it's really helpful in motions to say at concept review, this project is ready for project design approval. That is that clear message in the minutes that will go in to kind of be like, oh yeah, okay, this is what I heard from the board. Or this project is ready for project design approval, and I can continue it to consent. So maybe there are some times where you want it to come back to full board, but maybe there are times to push it to consent, because just, again, we do consent meetings on a weekly basis, so that kind of helps with our streamlining of single-family projects. So it's not always appropriate, because sometimes you see brand new large construction, so that's not necessarily appropriate, but in some instances it might be appropriate to do that. So there are different options for you. like to say maybe one other thing, that when something is scheduled for project design approval, we don't necessarily want to continue it indefinitely. We're going to be, as staff, we're going to be recommending that we get a date certain, that we select a date, because that permit streamlining means that we need to have a decision from this board. It doesn't mean you're obligated to approve something. It just means we need a decision. And your decisions are approve with conditions, or deny. And it could go any three of those ways. So that's really kind of just context for permit streamlining.
And an additional point of clarification there, the timeline, the 60-day timeline between the application completeness date and the project approval date is between completeness and project design approval. That is the key action there.
I think Ms. Lewis has a question.
Yes,
Yes.
as a part of the application review and determining if projects are ready to come here, what sort of drawing checklist are they reviewing? I mean, I know that came up today, but sometimes in the past too, where I feel like we don't quite have enough for us to make an understanding of the design.
That would be the project plan submittal guide. It's a resource on the city's website, and I think it's number 3 or 4 in your packet there. And it goes over what's in, what should be included in a standard site plan, floor plan elevations, and just kind of lists out the general requirements.
With that said, I do want to acknowledge, kind of to this third question, what we've heard in we had focus groups, and then we also had a survey, and we spoke with past and present board members. And what I'd like to get is for you all to have better concept reviews. And what we were seeing is kind of this pattern of materials being requested at project design approval. And we feel like that's a little bit too late. And it's unfortunate, like what we heard from board members is that we're not getting enough information about neighborhood context to really be able to help, to be able to make a decision on a project. So if you're asking for additional studies and this and that at project design approval, if they've already been to concept, that's kind of late. And from an applicant standpoint, they're frustrated because they're like, hey, I followed your city checklist and I submitted everything, and now SFDB is asking me for all this stuff. Why didn't you just ask me for it earlier? So I'd really like your thinking on what type of, particularly for the projects that are 85 plus, we have certain things that we defer to you. So the first project that we saw today, it was kind of like an applicant will request the SFDB to defer and to waive certain requirements. But there might be certain things that we should just say, hey, SFDB always asks for this, so let's just require it up front so that you all can have better reviews. Also, I think from staff is working on so many different, this is part of our process improvements, but right now we have so many projects. I'd like to have better quality submittals to get to you for concept, and staff doesn't run interference as much on that. We're really looking more for the zoning, the land development team review, and so sometimes you'll get things that don't always meet clear standards. So there's a level of quality control that I think staff can do that, did you include sections? Did you include all the elevations? Is everything, existing proposed? Those are basic things that you should be able to have. Are your context photos sufficient? Did you get all the way around? Do we have a sense? So things like that. There's a lot of information we ask for, so there is a kind of a balance when we have this many projects. But as we think about reducing the number of projects, I want quality to increase in that review.
So I think that's a good point, and I was wondering whether we wanted to touch on the process improvements, but I think that
Honestly, I would invite thoughts of what's working, what's not working,
Yeah.
truly.
So I think if all of us take a look at those checklists for those different stage gates of approval and provide Ted and Ellen thoughts on that, and we don't need to do that in real time, but if everybody could maybe just do that via email, that would be helpful. Like, is there something on the conceptual list on the PDA list that really needs to be on conceptual? And I guess the only thing that I would say about that is every time that we move a requirement earlier in the process, it helps potentially expedite this process, but it also creates financial burden on the applicant because they are now spending money for a project that is at risk and has not received a PDA. So in my mind, for a project where you may have a lower income client or applicant, that creates a greater burden. So I think we want to be conscious of that when we're looking at the checklists and going, what is a realistic item that we can request of an applicant at conceptual stage or at PDA, but that is not necessarily going to harness them with a significant increase in cost. So that's just a quick comment. I had a question on item 2. If you could clarify for the board at which levels of review neighbors are notified. Because today we heard that they're not notified at a review after final. So it would be helpful to hear that.
Thank you, Chair Kalas. Board members, so if a project is identified to require a mailed notice, and I'll get further into that in this next section, then it's noticed at the very first concept review. And by code, we're also required to notice at project design approval for those projects that do require a mailed notice. So concept and project design approval are the notice points. If someone proposes a review after final and the scope of revision, something in the scope triggers a notice, then that would also be noticed. But a review after final for a project that's already been noticed for a really minor change that doesn't meet one of those 8 requirements for a mailed notice wouldn't get noticed to the neighbors. But we would encourage an applicant, or a homeowner to talk to their neighbors about, any revisions with their project if it was noticed.
And that's really referring to the mailed notice. What's interesting is for a review after final, if a neighbor has added their name as an interested party, they will, and that planning record comes back up and that review after final will keep that same PLN record number, then our staff, our SFDB secretary sends the automatic emails for anything with that PLN record number. So they will be notified when an agenda is posted with that particular item. So even though there might be a scope of the review after final scope of work that doesn't require a mailed notice, if they are an interested party, they'll get an automatic email with information about that so that they can participate.
Which I think is what happened in his, the letter stated that it, due to the holiday weekend, the time and the turnaround of agenda.
Okay, so I just, I'm conscious of the fact that this is a public hearing, and so there's people from the public who may be watching this and who may be getting like a whole plethora of education on our process right now. So if I were if I were somebody who wanted to know when this came back to the board for final, for example, how would I ensure that I am notified of that?
There are a number of ways. Probably the easiest way would be to contact the SFDB secretary and request to be added as an interested party. And you would do that for a specific project. As a clarification, up until pretty recently, people used to be able to register as an interested party on a parcel. Anything that happened on the parcel, they would get notified. That is no longer correct. Is that? Okay, so that's no longer the process. You have to register as an interested party by project.
So if I may add to that, there are a couple of things. So for any person who's interested in following a project, oftentimes many of the projects do require a mailed notice. So they get noticed at concept review and project design approval, and there's information on those postcards of how, to add your name to be emailed automatically. So there's instructions for how to identify how to be an interested party. Every single agenda that is printed, there's information of how to sign up as an interested party. And that is, so there's instructions for members of the public. So there's multiple ways that we try to capture and try to fill our, cover our bases in terms of making sure people are aware of what's going on.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a comment about number 3, when you, if you want.
Please.
Feedback on what's been helpful and what's been difficult, just very briefly, and I know we'll get into this when we do our workshops about streamlining the whole process, but just specifically checklists. They're a blessing and a curse, right? They're either, if you get too detailed, it gets burdensome, and then it bogs down the process. If there's too many things, like if a project, so what I've found is knowing the right things to put on the checklist and checking it. So if you're going to send a project back with an initial feedback of, you didn't put the height of the wood fence on the plans, that's going to bog down the system, because the plans get returned back to the applicant and you're getting focused on minutia. So I think that gets into more detail on the workshops that we're going to do, like streamlining those checklists, but getting a project as quickly as possible to a hearing would, to one of the review boards would be a very helpful thing. But that being said, the checklists, and we've touched on this before in past meetings, that the checklists are not clear enough yet for the applicant to know what's required at each step. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up. And then also just staff isn't, I can think of at least 2 projects within the last month that we had kind of wasted hearings because they had to come back because they were missing information. So if staff could, just make sure that they end up reviewing the basic stuff to get a project to a point of getting to a hearing so that it can get an effective review and not get sent back just because something's missing. So.
One of my comments that I would have for number 3 is I think final details are supposed to be in the final checklist, and yet at PDA we are asked to basically approve the architecture. A lot of the architecture falls apart or succeeds relative to detailing, especially with certain thematic architecture, Mediterranean, ranch style. All of these are very dependent upon details being executed properly and size of members and things of that nature in order for them to be qualitative architectural projects. And so it's difficult for me to make a finding that a project rises to that level that we're required for it to meet for NPO findings if we don't have some sort of, at least I'll call them conceptual details. Is it going to be a plumb cut rafter tail or a 90-degree cut rafter tail? Is it going to be a 4x8 or a 4x6? And so there's going to be, it's a problem that needs to be resolved because I think we need to see those at PDA, and yet what happens is nobody really wants to engage the structural engineer until they have the PDA. They don't want to risk it, right? So now we've got details that show 4x8s, and the structural engineer comes back and says, well, they have to be 4x10s or they're not going to calc out. And so that comes back to us for final, and now those details don't jibe. So this is a question as to how we are able to bring those forward in the process at more of a PDA level, in my mind, and yet not create a conflict for ourselves where we're going to start burdening ourselves with,
Too many details. Yeah.
conflicts at a final approval stage gate. So.
Or I would even add building permit application.
Or there, yeah.
Makes sense?
And my number 3 is just that, when prepping the amount of time to go through prior to coming to the board, to have minutes and/or the videos like of the previous approvals linked in would be super valuable. Like, you know, where was I at on that project 1 month ago or 6 months ago? I know that's a lot to ask, but for me, it's very challenging to go back through and half the time when I search the approved minutes from the previous approval to get my context back to what was approved, I can't find it. I type in something wrong, so if there was any way that can be attached to our agendas. I know you guys do so much, but that would be super helpful for me to streamline.
There's a problem accessing electronic drawings and minutes for past hearings currently on
In the search
the
bar.
SFDRB website. You can't get to them. And
You
I
go- you
understand there's
type in
copyright issues there, and at a certain point, you may have to remove them. But we've got to figure out a way that board members can go back and review
Last drawings.
the drawings and minutes for prior meetings, yeah.
So when I was trying this recently, I think I ran into one of our issues in, I think it was, when was it? Like October of 2018, maybe? Or there were 29, like pre-COVID, okay? We didn't require digital plan sets. We were only working with paper. So there are voids. So you might have seen projects that go back to that date that were seen at SFDB. So it's like searching for something that doesn't exist. We may not have SFDB digital plan sets. And that came up with the project today. We didn't have those plan sets for you. But I'm also hearing that this isn't necessarily just for those projects, that you've also struggled with others. So
I'm not finding that the link is working at all right now.
No, it's not, because when you try to type in just to see minutes and you type in the search bar, just, it's a glitch. You can't, nothing comes up to.
Yeah, I was trying to access something that we reviewed definitely within the last year. I could not get to the drawings anywhere from the SFDRB homepage. Yeah, I couldn't get to it. And found nothing. Found no drawings, actually.
I've experienced that as well, and I understand what you're talking about. It used to link, and it doesn't link now due to the way the website's configured.
And that's one thing, is that the minutes, as soon as the active minutes will link to the plans. But one thing, once those minutes, they've been ratified and they go into our database, those links to the plans will no longer work. But I'm also hearing that when you type in specifically to pull up, it's just not working. So I think this is a newish database, so I will have to bring in IT and get a little bit more insight on that. And I don't have great information other than that, and we can follow up on that, because that's counter to what this is supposed to be.
We want to try to make your jobs easier, so thanks for that comment.
Well, I mean, even for the public, right, if they want to go in and see what was reviewed at a hearing, they should be able to do that too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Chair and board members, any further questions or comments on this section? Okay, then if it's all right, Chair Kalas, I'll jump into the next item,
Please.
or next section, rather. All right, so thanks for the great discussion. We'll turn to part 2 now, which is about SFDB in the municipal code. Let's kick things off with a brief history of the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance and why SFDB came to be. So, as you may know, prior to 1992, there was not discretionary review of single-family projects, except for in El Pueblo Viejo and on historic buildings that were part of the Historic Landmarks Commission's jurisdiction. That means in most of the city, single-family homes did not have to go to SFDB for their projects. That's pretty different from how it is today. Now, when the NPO was adopted in 1992, the review body was the Architectural Board of Review, or ABR, And their purview expanded to include single-family homes and provide a forum for discretionary review of those homes that weren't under HLC's jurisdiction. And the Hillside Design District, or the hillside areas like the Riviera, were the primary focus back then for that discussion. Eventually, ABR had too many projects on their plate, and by 2004, the community came to the city with a lot of concerns about what they saw as McMansionization on the Mesa, meaning that large homes were being built with minimal or no city oversight as far as the design. And so I want to emphasize that SFDB was created out of a strong community desire to try to curtail huge homes, and FAR and house size really dominated the conversation at that time when SFDB was created. So it was, the process was started in 2004, and then it was finally created in 2007. And the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance within the municipal code and the SFDB guidelines clearly outline what's within SFDB's purview. However, it's not always clear what's not in your purview. So I'd like to try to clear that up a little bit. Members of the public are going to come to you with all kinds of things that may or may not be in your purview. And it's your job and staff's job to respond to that and help the public understand what's within your purview. So staff are here to help you go through that and help members of the public get to the right place to answer their questions. So we want you to feel really comfortable asking staff for help with that. And also, if you know the answer, just responding to those concerns. So some of the things that aren't in your purview are residential density, the number of bedrooms, whether the owner of the property lives on the property or not, construction impacts and noise, and traffic and congestion. You know, these are things that really impact neighborhoods, and a lot of times this is kind of the only public forum for neighbors to voice those concerns. But we just want to help them understand that your purview is what's on the left, which includes project design and size, project aesthetics, neighborhood compatibility of the project, any topic in the guidelines and findings, and then aesthetic appropriateness of modification requests. The code also includes information about SFDB membership, qualifications, and quorum. And as you may recall, SFDB membership changed from 7 members to 5 this past year. The qualifications are for out of the 5 members, one of whom must be a licensed architect, and up to 3 can be public at large. Those public at large members must reside within the city. That was a specific requirement by City Council. And then any other members must have professional qualifications, such as being design professionals, landscape architects, etc. And the main thing we're going to be watching out for here is quorum, which is now 3 members. A licensed architect does not have to be present for there to be a quorum. And when we have an agendized hearing, we want to make sure there's quorum. So staff are going to be watching out for that. Out in the world outside of these agendized hearings, we need your help watching out for quorum issues. If there are 3 of you in the same place, that could be seen as a meeting of the SFDB. And that's technically a Brown Act violation if it's not agendized. So we'll watch out for that, and we'd ask that you all watch out for that as well.
And
have
if
a
I may
question
clear,
about
there are
that.
some circumstances, there are conferences, there are, AIA, we can understand that there's naturally occurring events where that happens, but it's more just a meeting, and it's more about kind of understanding like that you're not setting up times to all meet together to discuss items, and it's kind of a perception thing. So but yes, there are exceptions. I mean, we have holiday parties, the planning commission all gets together. It doesn't mean you can't, it's more about trying to make sure that there is no Brown Act violation. So does that make sense? And we can, if there's ever a question, we have the city attorney as a resource, and we can always verify with them if there are questions, but it's more about, I think the biggest concern is for these particular meetings, since we've had so many struggles with quorum, and we've had, described the SFD being in crisis. So, that's kind of starting in the fall, and just like how we've kind of gotten to this point where we hope that there aren't quorum issues. We've reduced it from 4 to 3. And that's really kind of our magic number, and that there aren't any specific requirements, because it used to be the licensed architect had to be part of quorum. And so now we have kind of more like maximum flexibility, and that's where we want to just make sure that there's a balance of, having an appointed board that can carry out the mission and the tasks of the SFDB, the charge, but then also that we're not holding up development projects on the other side, and that we can continue to have our meetings on a regular basis.
Thanks for that clarification, Ms. Kakinda. All right. So now, in Title 2269 of the code, which talks about SFDB membership and qualifications, that section also specifies the types of projects that require SFDB review. So there are over 35 individual code sections within 22.69, Title 28, and Title 30. Those are the 2 zoning ordinances that trigger SFDB review. However, the 2 most common design review triggers are 1, lots in the Hillside Design District with a 20% slope. Any exterior alterations needs to go to SFDB. That accounts for 50% of all SFDB projects. The second most common trigger that we use, we call it the 2-story trigger for short. It's any alterations, additions, or new buildings that are 2 stories or greater than 17 feet tall. The remaining 22% of projects include things like fences, pools, grading projects, alteration type projects that SFDB reviews. So just know that the bulk of them are either triggered because they're in the hillside or because they're 2-story. All right. And out of the more than 35 types of projects that trigger SFDB design review, the code only specifies 8 project types that trigger mailed noticing requirements. So on the left, you'll see those project types, and these are projects that the city's anticipated to have a potential for neighborhood impact, like a brand new house, a large addition, grading projects, exterior lighting with a glare potential, that sort of thing. And on the right, you'll see half of our notice postcard. There is another half that includes additional information, but this half shows the project address, the applicant and owner information, the staff contact information, and the hearing date and location. And folks who receive these notices can scan that QR code on the right and get access to the plans and agenda when those are posted. So I'd like to emphasize that not all projects require a mailed notice. And I think that's a common misperception that a lot of members of the public have, is that all SFDB projects are noticed. That's not the case. It's just these 8 types. That said, we do encourage any applicants who are proposing a project to talk to their neighbors. That's just part of the Good Neighbor Guidelines. It's a common courtesy. So we definitely encourage that. So your role in reviewing these projects is to determine whether a project meets or doesn't meet the findings in the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance. So in general, what are findings? They're the key ingredients of a motion to approve or deny a project. They're the things that you're going to rely on to solidify that approval or denial. They are part of the municipal code as well. You can find them in the municipal code, or it's a little bit easier, in the Single Family Residence Design Guidelines on page 5D. And you can find them in the agenda footer. That's the little bold section that's below the project description on any given agenda. I have an example on the screen. You can see in this footer, the project requires neighborhood preservation findings and hillside design district and slope lot findings. So staff will tell you what findings are required, and it's your job to look up those findings and make them as well. And we'll also have the findings available to read while you're making the motion, as you know.
You mentioned earlier that you'd prefer either like an approval or denial, but in my limited experience so far, we kind of continue things if there's not a denial, but we're just waiting on more information. would it be better than to deny it and then they have to start the process, or?
I can take this question. So it's really making a motion for a denial is a very serious thing. And what it means is, yes, anything can be appealed. So an approval can be appealed, a denial can be appealed, an approval with conditions can be appealed. Any action by the SFDB can be appealed, but a denial is a very specific thing. And what Ted is talking about is trying to really be clear on to why couldn't this project, what about it could you not make the findings? And that's where you come in and your motions come in. But what it means is if a project is denied, and let's just say it doesn't get appealed, let's just say it's outright denied, then an applicant cannot resubmit that design, that same design, for at least a year. That's within your guidelines in this yellow book that Ted has right here. But it's also, that's such a significant thing that there's no entertaining. They have to submit a new planning application. They have to pay new fees. They go through the application review process, which is our behind the scenes staff review process. So it's a little nightmare. So we don't want this board to just to offer up a denial. We want applicants to respond to the SFDB's comments to get them to an approvable, acceptable project. That's really what you all are shaping the comments, and it looks like Chair Kloss wants to add more to this.
This was precisely the error that I made in making a motion that we cleaned up today in consent calendar, because in my attempt to request of the applicant that they come back to us with a modified proposal, I made the error of using denial language rather than a continuance and a return to the board. So, yes, I agree. Ms. Cookend is right. You want to avoid the denial language unless we have, as a board, gotten to a point where we don't see anything coming of the project or it ever getting to the point where we can put an approval on it.
And usually permit streamlining kind of helps us because that helps us get to a decision point. And usually if the applicant's not responding and if they're just making tiny little things or they submit the same plans over and over again and you're like, hey, you haven't listened to us, we've shown you the sequencing of minutes, and then it's appropriate to deny something if you all can't make those findings and if you can specify why. But the applicant, usually they kind of play out as much time as they possibly can and either acquiesce or something happens generally. And oftentimes, things change, a little bit here and there. And people start off asking for the moon. And then things tend to whittle down sometimes, or if it has to do with mass and bulk. And oftentimes you're gonna really be presented with challenging projects, as you're fully aware of, that some might be borderline, and you're going to have as a board, you're going to have to wrestle with acceptability and if it can make it. And so these findings, you always rely on your findings to help guide you. It's not about personal opinion. It's not about, you have your guidelines, and to what extent can you make those findings, and to what extent did the applicant respond appropriately to your comments. One other comment I just want to make is that anytime someone is tapped to be the consent reviewer, if they don't feel comfortable with what they're seeing in front of them, you always have the ability to refer something to the full board. So it gives you, when you're the one person there, it used to be we had two people, but just for efficiency and your time, we've dropped it down to one. You can play that card if you don't feel confident, or you can continue an item so long as we're not hitting that permit streamlining date and say, we'd like to continue this with the following comments. And that gives the applicant information to know what they need to do to get them to something more acceptable.
I just feel the frustration, and I'm going to air it here, that just in general with the example of the deck and the roofing project, that, I mean,
And if let's keep it really broad, but like I hear you, like let's just kind of conceptually, like, I don't want to talk about a project, reopen a project, but if you want to just talk in general, like what a frustration is, and that would be, that's what I advise.
well, how many times do we allow someone to come back and not address the comments that we've made, or not like our decision? I just feel like, you know, there's pressure from both sides, and I feel like we don't really have a leg to stand on with, you know, the permit, and then, no, now, you know, they're appealing, or we've waived this, so I'm sorry,
If
I
we-
just,
if
we can let it
we've given
go.
them direction and they haven't responded, and we are up against a deadline, we have grounds for a denial.
And if you all can't make that as a board, it's okay to deny.
Yeah.
It's okay to deny because it's,
That's our
so long as
position.
those are your option, that's an option for you. Or it's okay to approve with conditions, which is another way to exercise an approval to get something to a place. And again, that action can be appealed as well. So what we've seen recently in the last 6 months, we've seen projects that were very borderline, like staff had no idea what was going to happen with the board, and they were ultimately approved for a variety of reasons. Those could have easily been denied and then appealed. We can probably assume that most of those would have been appealed had they been denied by the board. So it's just, it's going to be one or the other, and that's the beauty of due process and the beauty of of public process and government, that there is a stage in which to say, I'd like another round of eyes on this. And so I think you shouldn't, if you feel uncomfortable about something and you've continually feel like an applicant could just continue to submit the same thing, or if we've deemed them complete, we're scheduling them because we need a decision from this board. So if that's not the case, we as staff want to make sure that you're very explicit in your findings if you can't make the findings, and that's okay.
And I don't think there's any greater risk of an appeal, and I'm reiterating what Ms. Kokind said. I don't think there's any greater risk of an appeal over a denied project than an approved project at this point with what our board is dealing with. The last 5 or 6 appeals that I've attended at City Council have all been approvals. They have not been denials. So those are, those have been brought forth as appeals by the neighbors. And if they had been denials, and I've told City Council this, in all likelihood, they would have been appealed by the applicants. So I don't think that this board should have trepidation over denying something if we don't see movement and responsiveness by the applicants.
And I can say behind the scenes, staff are also advising the applicant. I mean, we've got multiple roles we're playing. We're supporting members of the public, we're supporting the board, we're supporting applicants, we're supporting our LDT team. But ultimately, it's, if we see an applicant who doesn't change anything, we're like, you really want to go back? Here's the deal. They're not going to be happy about this. Who's going to be happy about this when you've already heard the same comments? So it's kind of, we try to push when it's appropriate in order, and sometimes they're like, I accept this and this is what I want to do. And so it's like, all right, you understand.
So these are SFDB's applicable findings. Not all these findings will apply to every project. The one set of findings that will is the neighborhood preservation findings. So I won't spend too much time on this. We will transition to a little bit more of an interactive, not that it hasn't been interactive, but a little more of maybe a fun part of the training, and talk about how to make a motion. So I'm going to give you a little primer. And we'll start with the first step. So To get you primed, we will talk about a few kind of basic steps of making a motion, and in your packets, there is a motion-making worksheet. It should be, it's kind of, I think it might be number 7 or 8. If you,
Emailing this PowerPoint to us.
we can certainly email this out, and all this information is available electronically, I think with the exception of the motion-making worksheet, so we can
I think that was in
work
your,
to get
it's in
that
your
to you.
UCSB, or I always say UCSB, USB, but we can
Yeah.
also re-email it.
We can attach it. All right, and if you're not seeing it, let us know. We might have an extra.
It looks like this.
And that 3 motion worksheet is for the next little part of this.
I have a question already.
Yes, it looks like we might be missing one. Sorry about that.
I'm always conflicted on reading it versus adding my own color based on
question.
the conversation. And
Yes.
I'd love to confirm
I will get,
what the desired outcome would be.
I will
or
get into that
balance.
very thing.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna back it up to how to make a motion, just a quick primer here. So first step is to state what you're moving for. So you want to be explicit and use the language that's in the code. So for example, I move to grant project design approval, or I move to continue the project indefinitely. You want to say those words instead of I move to approve the project, or I move to move the project forward, because it's a lot more specific and reflects what's in the code to say project design approval and final approval or continue. If you are continuing a project, you will say something like, I move to continue the project indefinitely with the following comments. And then whoever is making that motion should have been listening to the board's comments during the commenting and deliberation phase and summarizing them into a neat package for the applicant and for the record. If you're approving, state each finding and include reasons the project meets the findings. For example, the project is compatible with the neighborhood because, and state the reasons that it's compatible. Could be the second story is, of an appropriate scale to the existing house and nearby second stories. And lastly, if you would like to apply conditions of approval after you've made your findings, you may do so, and you would say something like, said approval is subject to the following conditions. So now I'd like your help, and I'm going to call on a couple of you, 3 of you here, and feel free to discuss it. This isn't, I don't want to put anybody on the spot here, so this.
It's really, like, you can just read it, basically.
Yeah.
Don't be scared.
I'm not asking you to make a motion organically. I just want you to rate my motion. So, Board Member Graffiti.
Well, already the language to move this project forward would be incorrect.
That's right. And if you could read it and then
You'd
give
like me
us
to
a
read it?
rating,
Okay.
1 out of 10, with 1 being the worst, 10 being the best.
Please don't say this is my motion that I've made before.
It's not. These are motions that I came up with.
Okay.
So this is.
I move this project forward with the following comments. Consistency in appearance. The proposed development is consistent with the city and its appearance is appropriate. Compatibility. The proposed development is compatible with the neighborhood. Quality architecture and materials. The proposed materials are appropriate and the architecture is good. ... My rating. I mean, I think first it needs to be more formal what you're granting or approving or making the motion for. Moving this project forward isn't specific. I don't know if it's PDA.
You are correct.
I don't know if we're supposed to call out, like, for neighborhood preservation findings, if we need that or not, or if it's implied as you talk through it. I'd say my other call out here in general, though, is these are just very broad. There's no specific, is consistent with the city. Like, what does that mean? Is compatible with the neighborhood? Why? There's no why. It's just, yeah, not detailed enough.
Excellent, excellent review. Yeah, this motion, yeah, it's not clear what the motion is for.
I would be so
Yeah.
angry with the board if I had to take this motion to city council and somehow defend your decision. Please don't do this to me.
Any other ratings? We have a 2,
Yeah.
a 1. Okay, well, I guess I'm kind. I would give it a 3. And that's just because it's an
Very
attempt. I would, if this motion was made, I would encourage the maker to, be more specific and clarify some things. So we have another one, we have 2 more.
And we might, just as staff, like if I had a staffer sitting here and a board made that decision, I would encourage my staff to request the motion maker to be more specific.
All right, so the second one, Board Member Anderson, would you like to rate it? All right. So, this is it.
That's it. Okay, is it here on mine? This is the same thing too?
Yeah, it's motion number 2.
All right. Am I reading it first? Or
You don't necessarily have to read it verbatim, like read everything, but just make some comments on what you think.
Yeah, so one, you're not describing what is it PDA, is it concept? What is it approval for?
Board Member Anderson, if you could turn your mic on, please. Thanks.
Sorry, I forget we're in a public forum. So a little bit better, this is direct language out of the findings, though, and doesn't give specifics on A, B, and C for our project. How is it enhancing the appearance of the neighborhood? Because it uses high-quality materials. It blends architectural style with the Spanish mission of the rest of the homes, 20 closest homes. Same thing with compatibility. And I would love to have like a blank worksheet or something like that. I keep thinking like the best thing for me is probably one of those magic iPads that just has all the findings that we're supposed to describe, so I can list the specifics as we go through it. So it's very difficult to listen to everybody's comments and then have the specifics on all the items to make the motion. I thought I would be super amazing at this position, but it's a lot more difficult with all of the details that you're trying to manage at the end of the day. So again, it just needs to be more specific. I think this is direct language, and I'm negligent, and sometimes I'm like, oh shoot, I don't remember, was that quality windows and doors? Were they vinyl? Or, I usually, now I've got them memorized, but to be specific about the actual manufacturer of architectural materials and list those specifics with A, B, and C. Sorry. So I would give it a 4, maybe 5.
All right, and you're correct. The approval could be a lot more specific. It doesn't specify the specific approval it's for. You can imply it's for PDA because you're making findings. And you're correct. The findings don't discuss any project specifics. And you're also correct that these are the findings verbatim, from,
That we end up reading
from the code.
sometimes, but it really doesn't hold any weight.
You, Mike.
Sorry.
I have a comment that may or may not be true, but you can confirm this. But if a project's ready for an approval, and you say, my motion is to grant final approval, unless there's findings that need to be made, you don't have to make a bunch of comments. You can just say the project is ready for final approval. That's why there's findings, and that's why we read them. You don't have to make a huge, long motion. Is that
But
correct?
if there's ever an appeal, which there is every day, and pushback, you need those specifics.
That's why there's findings, but I mean, it's nice to state if it's a controversial project, and we
Which
should
they
know
are.
that. You know, sometimes we should know if it is. And so we would be planning ahead for the possibility of an appeal if there's been neighborhood oppositions. It's really good to include those things. But if there's nobody in the audience and nobody's ever showed up to any meeting and we make a final approval, you don't have to say anything else. You can.
I think I
Board
want
Member
to
Sherry.
put in there's the difference between project design approval is when findings are
Final,
required to
right.
be made. The final approval is you can make final approval, you can still condition it, you can deny it. But final approval, the piece to what you're saying is that this project substantially conforms to what received project design approval. Now, with the project design approval, the city attorney's not here, but it's dense and it's annoying, I recognize, and going through each one just feels so tedious at times. But we want clarification for the record, because otherwise yes, you're right that the majority of projects sail through, no one ever pays any attention, are just not as engaged necessarily. But if something does come up, it's helpful to clarify for the record of how you all got to a decision. So it's also just a learned skill. It's not easy to make these findings. You sit and you listen to others, and you have to get practice at it. But to your point, Board Member Sherry, is that there are going to be some of these that just have nothing to do with the project whatsoever. Maybe like the trees and landscaping. And don't try to make up something. Just be really direct in one sentence or really short. This project doesn't propose any landscape changes. Done. Like it's like an NA.
Well, that's my point, is that's what the findings are for. And I think the point of this discussion about findings is this particular slide is to be specific. Don't just read it. Comment on why it makes that finding. But you don't have to make up a motion. You don't have to add anything more to the findings. If we have to make the findings, then the whole reading of the findings does it's doing half the job for us.
So I'm going to try to mediate the topic for just a second. So one can go through the neighborhood preservation findings and say, I can make the findings because in terms of consistency and appearance, because quality materials are being used and the project design is compatible, or maybe B is what I'm talking about. The design is compatible with the neighborhood in that it is, modern stripped down ranch, and 80% of the houses in the neighborhood are that. So we can go through this and we can, I'll say, qualify or clarify or put a qualifier or an adjective type of statement to this, which narrows it and gives more project-specific information. Is that what the city attorney's office wants us to do? Or is council accepting of us doing something more like this? I move to give this project design approval. I can make neighborhood preservation findings because qualitative architectural materials like two-piece mission tile, roofing is being used, and plaster. There are no trees being removed, and wood windows consistent with the existing residence are being incorporated into the design. Is that acceptable enough, or do we have to read in each item that is applicable verbatim and then qualify it?
Yeah, it's the second, and it's really this is a direction. I have to do it for the staff hearing officer. The planning commission has to do this for all of their projects. It's very specific, kind of going through. With that said, as part of our process improvements, if there are things that just seem like you're robots and you say it and there's never anything that you qualify, we can look at the findings. Is this the appropriate set of findings? So I think that we can address some of the things that are where you don't generally have qualitative statements.
Yeah, where there's
related
not
to it.
really what we would
It's
call
just-
what's the word I'm looking for? There's not really an there's not really an additional benefit being proffered
Right.
by the particular action.
that's okay. And I would say those are the ones where I'm like, I'd highlight and be like, is this needed anymore? Question mark. Is this something that we might, as a SFDB board, as a recommendation from staff, that we might want to amend by taking out? And is there something missing from this list? So
Okay.
we're not here to necessarily discuss that, but I just want to let you know that those findings can be on the table as something that we review as part of process improvements.
Okay, so just so that we're all clear, for right now, these need to be read into the record. We cannot just refer to the Hillside Design Guidelines, quote, or the neighborhood preservation findings. We have to read those findings into the record, and then we can qualify them in a more specific manner after each subcategory has been written, has been read into the record, but they need to be read into the record verbatim.
Or, yeah, you go through each topic.
Yes.
And Ted, for time's sake, if we could move on to the next slide and just kind of get a sense of, that this is kind of what we're looking for.
So I'll highlight a couple things on this, and one is that the motion is very clear. The intro to the motion, what you're moving for is clear. It's project design approval and continuing the project to consent with the following comments.
There's no timeline.
Yes, you're correct. There is no timeline. That would be ideal. I didn't give this a 10 out of 10, though. And for example, just for time's sake, we'll focus on item B, compatibility. The proposed second-story addition is compatible with the neighborhood and site because it is stepped back from the street, and its size, bulk, and scale are appropriate for the existing residents and do not exceed typical sizes of second stories in the neighborhood. So this item here is talking about a specific project element, the second-story addition, and it's explaining, several reasons why it's compatible with the neighborhood because of the step back, because its size, and it's comparing it to other residences in the neighborhood. So these are the kind of details that we're looking for. I will say, it took me a minute to write this, so I can imagine if you're making the motion and kind of on the spot, that would be difficult to do. So again, it takes practice. It takes some getting used to kind of the format of the motion. And that's why, we like your feedback on some resources to help you make motions. So yeah, I'd give this one 9 out of 10 because it could be more specific with the timing, and I'm not Chair Kalas, and she can make better motions than I can. So let's move to questions, and I want to address one that has come up recently a few times, and that's to clarify when the sole proprietor statement is required to be read and when recusal, or otherwise known as stepping down, is required. And so I'll kind of kick it off with that, and then we'll go with any other questions about what we've talked about. Then I'd like to get your feedback on how can we better support you in motion making. So pursuant to the Political Reform Act, sole proprietors, meaning people who act as applicants for a project, may present to the same board of which they're a member. So if one of you, is representing a project on your firm to the SFDB, you may do so as long as you read the sole proprietor statement, which, basically says that by law, this is allowed. And Ms. Gokinda, if there's anything more specific you'd like to get into with that.
It's just procedure. We have a slide and it will be read. So if you're ever on this side of the table and representing the project, that's just gonna kind of have that heads up and we'll need to do that. If you're representing your own home, it's different and the sole proprietorship doesn't necessarily apply. So you would need to have another representative to present.
And essentially, we'd like you to think of it as taking off your SFDB hat and putting on your applicant hat. And you'll need to move to this side of the table. And this is to make it really clear to the public what your role is in the project. And regarding recusal or stepping down, those two terms are kind of used interchangeably. If you live within 500 feet of a project, then it's best if you step down for the reason that you could have some sort of a bias toward it. So stepping down or recusing yourself means, walking out of the room during the hearing to avoid any perceived, you don't want to be shaking, like nodding your head or doing any facial expressions that might clue anyone into what you're thinking about the project if you have to recuse. So it's best to leave the room, and you can kind of monitor on the screen out there how the hearing is going and when to come back in for the next item.
And if there are any questions, the city attorney, you can always just reach out to us and we'll work with the city attorney. So we can support you.
And just a last note on that, if you do have to recuse yourself due to a proximity conflict of interest or a financial conflict of interest, like if you're presenting on, or if you're hearing a project that's being put together by your firm that you're an owner of, then you would say, I have a financial conflict of interest. And you want to state the reason. You don't have to get into detail, but you want to state the general reason you have a conflict of interest. So now that, if there are any questions on that, happy to answer them, and we'll open it up to just general questions about what we talked about.
So I had a point of clarification related to this morning's consent calendar. So if one of us has a project, but we have somebody else who is presenting it to our board, and we are not hearing it, so let's assume we've stepped down, do we need to be out of the room when the secondary person is presenting it? If we stay in the room, do we need to read the Sole Proprietor Act?
That is my
Statement.
understanding. If you stay in the room and are acting as part of the applicant team, then you would need to read that.
What if you're just in the gallery and you're not acting as part of the applicant team actively at?
The best thing to do in that case would be to step out of the room just to avoid any perceived conflict of interest.
Okay.
And I think, it's always, every piece is so specific. So again, we can always confirm with the city attorney's office on certain things.
That would be a good point of clarification.
Because it's different to say it's best to, as opposed to you have to. So, because there's some projects that we're going to present in our firm that I'm fine leaving the room. And then there's other ones where I might want to interject if somebody else in my office is presenting it, and they might miss something that I might
Right.
want to say, or
Right.
or
Exactly.
or there might be. So in that case, it would be nice to know if I can sit next to the person
I
presenting
think
it.
I think it makes the most, I don't often see someone sitting in the back. I'm much more familiar with someone sitting there and just not answering questions unless you need to jump in and interject. And that's when we should just do the sole proprietorship and call it a day, because that's, again, the clear information for members of the public, and it will kind of just make it a clean process.
And Board Member Sherry, to further clarify that, I think the city attorney's office would advise you to always step down if there is a potential for a conflict of interest and leave the room.
Yeah, if you were on this side of the table,
Right.
that's what.
What we want to avoid is, if
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think, I don't know if I don't know if that was clear to Ted, but,
Yeah.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, we
will.
never stay.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we're here to advise you. So you have to let us know in some instances if there's a conflict of interest. But speaking of conflict, I really want to make sure that we
Right.
can get to any questions, because it is late, and
So if there aren't any questions about what we just talked about, or feel free to keep thinking of them. But the second question we have, and we want your feedback, is any questions about making motions, applying findings, and looking at that motion-making worksheet. Is that something that's useful? How could we tweak it to make it better? And are there any other resources we can provide to support your motion-making?
Just to clarify, so it's best to go through let's say we have neighborhood preservation findings that we need to make a motion. Best to go through the points in terms of, okay, the first one, consistency and appearance. So making sure we're covering it very clearly, but we don't necessarily need to read everything verbatim and then add our own color in addition to that. That's what I interpreted, but I want to make sure it's crystal clear.
So we always pull up on, we have PowerPoints that, if you want to switch over to screen.
I've got them here.
So for example,
Yeah, or-
trees. We need to read the entire paragraph.
No. So with trees, it's really going to be somewhat project dependent. You need to kind of scan this
Right.
to be like, can I make this finding? Or you're going to say, okay, I'm at the trees section, but this project isn't proposing any removal of trees.
Right. Okay. Okay.
There-
Got it.
Yeah, so this doesn't
it
apply to this
depends.
project.
Okay. Got it.
There are
Thank
going to be
you.
others where it's, if you go to consistency in appearance, generally, people always kind of start off, the proposed development is consistent with the scenic character of the city, enhance the appearance of the neighborhood because blah, 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 blah. You need to answer why, like, give us pieces of why. And again, same thing with B, it's compatible in size, bulk, and scale because of blah, 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 blah. So,
Okay.
but like I said, not everything is going to apply. So you don't need to create something out of
Okay,
nothing.
okay,
You can
that's
just simply
helpful.
say, this doesn't apply to this project or this
What about
piece.
public safety and welfare? That's one that I have a hard
So-
time finding specific.
I think this might be a question for process improvement.
Okay.
I always hear this one being said, and it doesn't, I mean, if there is, like, it seems to just be like rote, like,
Yeah.
verbatim, okay, blah, 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 but I don't really hear additional content on this. But that's just what I've observed, and you all may feel similarly, or like, how does this help contribute to your decision, and is this necessary? That would
Okay.
be how I'd start a process improvement question.
In terms of comments only, or comments, let's say a project's moving on to staff hearing officer. Typically, the comments are in, I know we've had examples of paragraphs to read and then adding color. Is there anything beyond that, beyond comments relating to what's requested that we should be providing? I know this has been asked of me recently to go beyond that to provide comments. So I just want to understand what this is specifically at consent, I would say, like what the comments are regarding, what the minimum or I guess the ideal comments are regarding. Is it just the next motion or?
In terms of when a project has to go to the staff hearing officer.
Yeah.
So your role as SFDB, when there's a project that requires either staff hearing officer review or planning commission review, is that first of all, staff should be telling you what is the request of what are they going to planning commission or staff hearing officer for?
Yeah.
And once you understand that, your role is to understand or to describe, comment on the aesthetic appropriateness of that. And you're just thinking in your SFDB hat of neighborhood compatibility, good neighbor guidelines. What they're asking, how does that kind of fit in? You're not approving that modification request. You're just saying, okay, well, this 6-inch encroachment that this applicant is requesting is aesthetically appropriate to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's, by extending that, it's really follows the pattern of development of the neighborhood, or, you're just, or is it going to have any kind of adverse effect? And everything that this board says is communicated to the staff hearing officer. So I actually am the staff hearing officer for the majority of projects right now. I'm just like the designated one. So, it's helpful that I listen to these meetings, but you're basically communicating with me of like, okay, how do they think of it from a design perspective? And I'm looking at it from a land use perspective. And I have a separate list of findings as the staff hearing officer that I have to make. So I'm working off of findings as well, and you're working off of findings. So just think of what would be helpful context for the staff hearing officer or planning commission to know.
Thank you.
Another quick note on that, the Single Family Design Board General Guidelines book, the Yellow Book, does talk about aesthetic appropriateness, but I think it could talk more about how you're reviewing the guidelines and findings. You're reviewing the project for consistency with guidelines and findings. So that's another kind of way to think about it.
And if a project triggers SFDB design review and requires a modification, those projects are obligated to go to concept review first before going to planning commission or staff hearing officer. But I think, does anybody have any other questions?
I don't. This was great. Thank you so much. I think it was super helpful for, I mean, I know there were a couple things that I learned in the process, and I think it was super helpful for everybody. And I would like, I want to take this and like have it on the SFDRB website. So like when somebody from the public goes, I don't understand how it works, it would be so nice to have this up there where they could just click on it and understand that process in terms of how things are reviewed initially for pre-applications, et cetera. So I think it would just be, I mean, even for clients to be referred to this, I think it would be so helpful. So I thank you for the time.
I appreciate the comments, and I mean, I really appreciate Mr. Hamilton's role in this because this is, I mean, you all are a little bit guinea pigs, but we're really, and we're not trying to make things too basic, but we're trying to level the playing field because each and every one of you have a different level of experience. So we're just trying to create a baseline of shared understanding amongst you as board members. We'll be able to take this out and try to, create websites, to create more materials for members of the public or anybody that kind of needs to see it. So it will help with our board member onboarding too. We would probably be taking new members through the same kind of presentation. This was kind of I'll call it the easy piece. The next one is going to be denser and harder and to navigate with project compatibility or neighborhood compatibility and design guidelines is really kind of where the rubber meets road. But before we close out, we'll have to do public comment. That's the only thing, to make sure that we're following procedures.
Okay, so at this time, I'd like to open this item. This is item 3. This was a general discussion and training topic for the Single Family Design Board, and we'll open this for public comment for those in the gallery as well as online. Mariah, do you have anybody who'd like to speak?
Thank you, Chair Kalas. I'll go ahead and start with in-person public comment. At this time, I haven't received any speaker slips. And seeing no one move to speak, I'll go ahead and move to virtual public comment. If you wish to speak on Zoom, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. I don't see any hands raised, and we did not receive any written correspondence for this item, so I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Kalas.
So we'll close public comment, and I will thank staff for all of their help today, as well as the board. It was a good session, and we will adjourn today's meeting for the Single Family Design Board, June 20th, 2022. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.